إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another session of Deeper Seerah. Today we shall be looking at pre-Islamic Arabia and paganism. Last lesson we looked at monotheism. This session we'll look at paganism. So let's have a look at a few pictures. Where would you place these images? Where would you place them? In the north or in the south? By now, after everything that we have studied, you should be in a position to know by the topography where this is. So let's have a look at these images. Where would this be? Petrographs on the wall, a vast open expanse with rocks, ancient writing on the wall all over Arabia, camels, and this mysterious temple over here. Right, so I'll tell you. This is Wadi Rum. All of those pictures you saw is in Jordan, Wadi Rum, the famous Wadi Rum, and this temple here is the temple of Al-Lāt, one of the goddesses mentioned in the Quran. Lat, Manāt, Uzzā. This is an overhead map, architectural kind of a image of the structure. So we have the main structure, the main precinct, and then behind it we have many, many rooms. This is it from the sky. And here is a close-up again. If you look at the top left, the pillar there, you can see there are inscriptions there. And this is the site. It's a huge site, as you can see, and here you can see a wall around it. Is that like a haram? Is that like a sacred area which is inviolable? And you can see the car is quite small, so the temple complex area is quite large. Now, this is a Nabatean temple, the structure as it stands today, but it goes back much further in history. It was built during the reign of King Aretas IV in 9 BC to 40 AD is when he lived. The original name is Harithat or Haritat. That's his original name. The complex has many inscriptions, even Latin from the 3rd century. So many people over a millennia had used this place, more than a millennia, and they had left their own inscriptions, which is a testament to the different people's cultures and even religions that happen to use this place. The rooms behind it, there are 20 rooms. Just some background information, over 40,000 inscriptions and petroglyphs have been found in Rum, showing the various civilizations and tribes that have inhabited the desert. Aramaic, Thamudic, and Hismaic speaking nomads who carved on the rocks prayers to their gods and the location of water sources. This is a panoramic view of the Nabatean temple of Al-Lāt in Wadi Rum. So the inscription here, may Allah to remember Abdullahi, son of Qayyamat, mason who of for good, and then may Allah to remember Aidu, mason son of. So were these the ones that made the temple, and then they're making an invocation for Allah to remember them? May Allah to remember Banya, son of Para, and Tayma, Haruna, Abdamanu for good. May Allah to remember Taura, son of Marona for good. May Allah remember Abdullahi. This is very interesting because all of the Arabian Peninsula, as far as the Hismaic Desert in Jordan and Syria and the Black Desert, is covered with petrographs and especially inscriptions. We spoke about this before. And those inscriptions are normally invocations for their gods, prayers for protection, or for remembrance, and then curses for anybody who disturbs them. This is a pillar from there in one of the museums, most probably in Jordan. It's got inscriptions there, and those inscriptions look Latin. Yes, they're Latin inscriptions. I think I remember seeing this in Jordan. Here is the site of the temple complex. Here it is again. The location and scenery is very dramatic. On the right-hand side, you can see an inscription that's carved as well on the top. It probably looks like it's Arabic. And here you go again, and some more images. And this is in an ancient language, inscriptions carved on the rock face there. And this is the temple of Al-Lāt, as we can see. This is Al-Lāt of Basra. So this is probably a temple in Basra, actually. Al-Qutbah, who is Al-Uzzā. Right, so it's to Dashura. Okay, so on this site, many gods were worshipped. Dashura and Balshamim was worshipped here. Al-Uzzā was worshipped here, and this is Al-Lāt of Basra, which has made Taymullahi servant of Akfal. So the inscription is telling us who carved it and what he's asking for and which goddess he's asking for. So Al-Lāt is the goddess that he's asking here. The languages, there's two different languages we can see there. On the right-hand side, it looks like it's Hismaic or Safietic, and on the left-hand side, that looks like Greek. Here it is, closer up. So what's the purpose of me showing you this temple? I'm showing you this temple because we know that the Arabians, the pre-Islamic Arabs, all of the Arab tribes were for the most part pagans. They worshipped a plethora of gods, the most famous being Lat, Manāt, Al-Uzzā and Hubal, because these are mentioned in the Quran, and Hubal was the tutelar god of Mecca. Apart from this, we don't really have much detail from the Meccans themselves as to what god or goddesses they worshipped. The other Arabs in the other areas and the non-Arab civilizations in the south, they have extensive records, and we can get a very accurate idea, a fairly accurate idea of what gods and goddesses they were worshipping. So to set the tone, the reason I showed you this is because Al-Lāt was worshipped as far north as Syria. Right? So keep that in mind why I'm saying that. Now we're moving on to the people in the Quran known as the people of Ad. There are many verses in the Quran. Let's have a look at some of them. Has there not reached them the news of those before them, the people of Noah and the tribes of Ad and Thamud and the people of Abraham and the companions of Madian and the towns overturned? Their messengers came to them with clear proofs, and Allah would never have wronged them, but they were wronging themselves. In Surah Ibrahim we have, and if they deny you, O Muhammad, so before them did the people of Noah and Ad and Thamud deny their prophets. And if they deny you, O Muhammad, so before them did the people of Noah and Ad and Thamud deny them. This is two different surahs with the same message. Surah Al-Furqan, and we destroyed Ad and Thamud and the companions of the well and many generations between them. When we look at these ayahs, what's the most glaring thing that we can see? Allah is talking about tribes and people that are in the north of the Arabian Peninsula. So here Allah is saying the people of Noah and Ad and Thamud and Abraham, all four placed in the north. The companions of Madian also. The second surah, Noah, Ad, Thamud, again, and third surah and the fourth surah. Thamud and Ad are always described together. What's the importance of this? There is a belief amongst Muslims and Arabs. There are two beliefs. One belief is that the Arabs originated in the south, which we can comfortably discount now. And the second belief is that the people of Ad were in the south. There's not a shred of evidence. It's not mentioned in the earlier sources. At some point in history, probably medieval history, this story surfaced, this idea germinated that the people of Ad were in the south. Thamud is in the north. They know where Thamud is, but Ad is firmly placed somewhere in the south. Where, they don't know. right? There's a name of an area that they have, and they say these are the people of Ad. However, we found today in that same temple that I showed you, the worship of Al-Lāt, and in that area, two surnames that have like the family name or the location name, Ad, the written the Ad. Ahmad Jallad has done a stunning paper on this and some stunning work on this to show a possible link between the people of Ad and the people of the people of Ad who were worshipping Al-Lāt in Wadi Rum. Now that makes sense for many reasons. When we go through these slides, we'll understand why, but I may as well give it now. We will see that a lot of the Arab gods actually originated in the north, and the most prominent Arab deities that we know about through the Quran and Hadith all had their genesis in the north. And it ties in with the fact that Allah is mentioning in the Quran Ad and Thamud together. So if Thamud is in the north, why can Ad not be in the north? The cultural dynamic of the Qurayshis, the Hijazis, was more north looking and more north in its flavor than it was south looking or south in its flavor. So when we tie all of these things together, when we look at language, it came from the north. Their cultural clingings, the north. The Kaaba is known as the Syrian Kaaba. There were other Kaabas in the south. This Kaaba is known as the Syrian Kaaba because it was on the road to Syria, but it's still very far away from Syria. Why was it known as the Syrian Kaaba? And on top of that, we have Ad and Thamud. Allah is mentioning them together, and everything points to that the Arabs came from the north, their language came from the north, and their gods came from the north, which gives a possible site to look for that the people of Ad were in the north. Because for 1,000 years they were looking toward in the south, they never found it. Now we're looking towards the north, and we found evidence. So traditionally, Ad is placed in the south. Allah is mentioning, I'm just going to go through it again. Allah mentions Noah, Thamud, and Ad together. Hey, Surah Fajr. Did you not see how your Lord dealt with Ad, the people of Aram, with their great stature, unmatched in any other land, and Thamud, who carved their homes into the rock in the stone valley, and the Pharaoh of mighty structures? They all transgressed throughout the land, spreading much corruption there. So your Lord unleashed on them a scourge of punishment, for your Lord is truly vigilant. This is taken from Wikipedia. The chrononym of the name Aram refers to the geographical region in which they lived and means highlanders. So Aram or Rum, Wadi Rum. Most people think that Wadi Rum is because of the Romans there, because Nabatea was a province like, this is a Petrea, what did they call it? Arabia Petrea, Rocky Arabia was a province of the Romans. So they think this is Roman, it was Roman territory. Right, even now you can see lots of signs of it in Jordan with Jerash, with the Daraj al-Romani in Amman, and the temple standing on the hill. And they think, oh, Wadi Rum, it's to do with Rome. Actually, it's not. The word Rum actually means a elevated plain. So Aram, possible Arameans, we don't know. But remember what I said, that in the old languages, they didn't use vowels. So if you take away the vowels, you have rum, RM, rum. Rum, was there anything before there? Iram, Uram, Aram. Just even if there was nothing before, Rum, Ram, Rim. It's just R and M, right? So Wadi Rum. The pillars of Iram, Ram, Rum, everything points towards that location. The toponym Aramu appears in an inscription at the East Semitic speaking kingdom of Ebla, listing geographical names and the term Arami, which is the Ebelite term for nearby Idlib. Again, the location is that same Syrio-Jordanian kind of a desert. Occurs frequently in the Ebla tablets. This is 2300 BCE, that's 4,000 years ago, almost 4,000 years ago. One of the annals of Naram Sin of Akkad, again, this is a theophoric name. Naram Sin is the god at the end, god or goddess of Akkad, mentions that he captured Dubal, the Ensi of Arami, Arami is seemingly a genitive form. That's the reason why it declines into Arami and not Aramu. In the course of a campaign against Simarum in the northern mountains, other early references to a place of people of Aram have appeared at the archives of Mari and at Ugarit. The term Aram and Aramean frequently occur in the letters of a governor's archive from Nepal. The written text informed about farmers from Beit Aram, referring to the region of Aram. The word Ahlamu was attested since the Old Babylonian period, first as a designation for the Amorites and later for the Arameans. In the Assyrian royal inscriptions, the term, this is probably Arlamu or something, Arabu, and the name Aramu are sometimes combined to form a double designation for Arameans. Early Jewish tradition claims that the name is derived from the biblical Aram, son of Shem, a grandson of Noah in the Bible. So if this claimed that the name is derived from the biblical Aram, son of Shem. So the Table of Nations, which is not accurate, by the way, but some Muslims do hold on to the Table of Nations. The Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims try to derive meaning from the Table of Nations. If that's the case, then even the Table of Nations will point you towards the north. Basically, everything about the Arabs, as mentioned, points to the north. So why didn't the Arabs look in the north for the people of Ad? For some strange reason, just like they believe that they came from the south, they're also looking in the south for the people of Ad. Anyway, let's move on. This is a dramatic image of when Allah destroyed them. You can read the paper. Here is the paper here. The paper by Ahmad Jallad is entitled The Epigraphy of the Tribe of Ad. Right, so pre-Islamic Arabian religion. What deities come to mind? Straight away, the three deities that should come to mind are Lat, Manāt, and Uzzā. Why? Because the Quran mentions them and we've heard these in the Seerah time and time again. Apart from that, if you ask anybody else what other deities did they worship, they don't know. We won't know because it's not listed. Al-Kalbi's book lists some idols, but it's not listed that the pagan Arabs worshipped any other deities apart from these four, even though there were around 360 deities around the Kaaba and inside the Kaaba. We don't know. We only have limited amount of information. The Muslims did a good job, the early Muslims did a good job of destroying all records, so we don't really have much information to go on. But we can glean things from the epigraphic record now, alhamdulillah, and we can then tie that in with what Al-Kalbi and people like that, Tabari, what they have in their records to see what matches and what doesn't match. Obviously, we go by the epigraphic record as a source of evidence and we see if we can reconcile what the classical Muslim scholars wrote with the epigraphic record and see what kind of a picture that we can glean and draw. Okay, so as I said, Arabia can be divided into two civilizational zones. We have the northern zone and we have the southern zone. Sorry, you will see my notes like this is because this is for my online classes. So the north, we have the Palmyrines, we have the Nabateans, we have the Ghassanids, we have the urbanized Arabs who were in the Roman domain. And in the south, we had Saba and Himyar very, very highly, especially the Sabaeans' high civilization. It was very highly civilized. They were advanced in literature and the arts and monuments, especially their monuments, and in farming. They had tamed the waters of the dam of Ma'rib for over 1,000 years, which allowed them to collect the rainwater from they're on the corner of the monsoon belt, collect and save the main water, which allowed for extensive agricultural farming. And we know that the south is very famous for frankincense and myrrh, monumental architecture, complex irrigation, and the spice trade. What about the Hijaz? So we have the north, which we mentioned. Then we have the south. Where does the Hijaz fit in? The Hijaz sits in the middle, culturally closer to the North Arabian Safir, as I mentioned to you, spoke a North Arabian dialect, early Arabic, tribal and nomadic, unlike the structured monarchic south. Mecca was a religious city, Medina was an agricultural city. Right? So this is where Mecca fits in the north-south divide of Arabia. What will that naturally tell us about the pantheon? If I mentioned this in the previous slide. Everything points towards the north. So even the Arabian pantheon, we would now assume, before me showing you the slides, that the gods would have come from the north. And indeed, that's exactly what it is. And that's what I'm going to show you now. So the tens of thousands of inscriptions found throughout Arabia mention a host of gods thanking or petitioning them, but they don't tell us much else. So even if you have a million inscriptions, and if for the most part all they're doing is invoking their god, asking for protection, or praising them, or asking to be remembered, or a curse placed on anybody that disturbs them, and then with a family name, that will not tell you much, even if you had a million. But sometimes you get one or two pieces of extra information, language formations, letters dropping, not dropping, the evolution of language over a millennia, and that adds up exponentially in the picture you're trying to make about things. So we can add everything together and we can come to better understandings. We cannot know anything about the attributes of nomadic gods unless information is preserved in a larger text such as the monuments or in the Quran. So when it comes to, for example, if we look at the Roman gods, there's a plethora of information about them. Hindu gods, there's a plethora of information. But with the nomadic Arabs, they didn't record anything. So the little bit we have on the monuments is all that we have, and then even less on the inscriptions scattered throughout the Arabian Peninsula. The Bible speaks of pagan gods which are also mentioned by Islamic historians, which we shall have a look at. So that's some more information gleaned from the Bible. The South Arabian inscriptions mention over 100 different gods. So on their monuments alone, over 100 different gods are mentioned. And for somebody who's into that line of study, it's very interesting work to go through, but not all of them need to be known for our research area here. In fact, we're more interested in the northern gods, but we'll start from the south and work towards the north. So the two different pantheons, let's have a look. Why is the pantheon in the south larger than the Hijaz? At least in the epigraphic record and on the monuments fixed in stone. Number one, it's in South Arabia, it's larger. The pantheon is much more larger and complex. It's centered around agriculture. Why? Because they were a farming and agricultural community. Fertility, all places have that. And commerce, because they were a business type people, trading for thousands of years. They had an elaborate religious structure because they were a civilized entity, and naturally you're going to have a hierarchy with the power at each stage and an elaborate structure of government, bureaucracy, and religion. They had priests and they had ceremonies, which makes sense. In the north, they had a simplified pantheon. North, I'm saying north in relation to the Sabah and Himyar and those places. The north, which is Hijaz now, and all the Bedouins up until the top end of Hijaz, just before the Roman domain. A simplified pantheon. Even though there were probably hundreds of gods, and there were hundreds of gods, the pantheon and the ideas around it, the relationships were simplified. Tribal and local deities, simple religious systems, and god of war and this and that, because they were a warmongering people, so naturally you'll have prominent gods like this. Pliny says frankincense, after being collected, is conveyed to Shabwa on camels, one of the gates of the city being open for its admission. The kings have made it a capital offense for camels so laden to turn aside from the high road. At Shabwa, a tithe estimated by measure and not by weight is taken by the priests for the god they call Sayyid, and the incense is not allowed to be put on the market until this has been done. This tithe is drawn on to defray what is a public expenditure, for actually on a fixed number of days the god graciously entertains guests at a banquet. So the gods are so intertwined with business, that when they give a tithe, some of it has to go to their gods. Tithes exacted on the same traffic by the Minaian deities could be discharged by public works such as construction of town walls undertaken by the tithe prayers. So whatever amount of tithe you're giving, it's given in the form of a public work. So build a wall, fix up that pillar on the temple, make a nice road coming up towards the temple, or feed the poor in the name of the god. That's the tith. In Kataban, water supplies the promulgation of deity Anbay. That's the deity Anbay, that's the reference there. The shared cult of that's uncle, by the way. They would even call their gods uncle. Of Labak enabled cooperation between a group of Kataban landlords and their tenants in far off. These are references for things that they do. In Saba, military campaigns were carried out for Al-Makkah and the Sabaeans, and fines for all manner of offences were paid to Al-Makkah and the kings of Saba. So if you breach the law, you pay a fine and it goes to their god. Military campaigns were carried out in the name of their god and then their nation, as opposed to in the name of the ruler. In other words, it was the cult of the patron deity that allowed the community to function as a coherent entity, as opposed to a mass of discrete, localized kingship groups acting as a sort of social glue. In less complex societies than South Arabia, the pantheon might be much smaller and the patron deity might assume a particularly prominent place. Didan turned to Dhu Gaba. Dhu Gaba is one of the deities over there, the master of the grove for their needs and rarely to anybody else. So some of the Arab tribes, we'll see, they only worshipped one god. That was their tribal god. On a more macro scale, some families would worship one specific god. On a larger scale, whole districts would be worshipping one god. So it differed all across Arabia. In Didan, it seemed they turned to only this god for their needs and rarely any other god. That means Didan is a famous settlement. This name doesn't appear in any of the stories around Mecca. So it seems Mecca had its own pantheon, its own gods that they were used, and they, even though they were taken from the north, they didn't take everything. The Minian god Wood or Wad, it's probably Wood, appears in a few inscriptions, but these are presumably attributes to the Minian colony that ran trade operations in the oasis. There is Qutba or Akhtab, god of writing, who is probably related to a Babylonian scribe or deity, perhaps brought to northwest Arabia by the Babylonian monarch Nebu-Naid. But other gods are mentioned no more than once or twice, probably by travelers. The Minians had a colony in North Hijaz, in the Hijaz area, to safeguard their interests. So over time they adopted the northern gods. That's why we have the name Wood and we have the Babylonian Akhtab god. So where did Al-Lāt, Manāt and Uzzā originate from? We've mentioned that all the deities that the pagan Arabs used to worship originated in the north. It wasn't a case of they originated them themselves, and it just happened that the northerners borrowed them. The civilized Romans, the Nabateans, the Palmyrines, they borrowed them. It's not going to work that way. It's the other way. They originated those deities, and it's the pagan Arabs of the desert, the nomadic, simple, semi-nomadic, city-dwelling, simple Arabs that would borrow the pantheons of the the larger civilizations. What do Seerah books mention about them? The Seerah books only tell us that they were gods. That's it. They don't tell us where those gods originated from. They don't tell us any of the rites. They don't tell us anything in the Seerah. Al-Kalbi mentions one or two extra things. And the Seerah will probably mention just one or two simple rites. You'll find, very simple details of the gods at the beginning of Ibn Hisham's Seerah. Most people will not include those things in other Seerahs. Even in the Seerah lectures, they don't really teach you much details, right? They will only parrot what they've read in Ibn Hisham, and without them understanding it properly, because, bless them, they're teaching the Seerah, but they're not anthropologists or archaeologists or like inscriptologists or people like that. So they wouldn't know, and they couldn't piece the pieces together to give you a cohesive picture. They would just give you what they read. Some of it would make sense, some of it wouldn't make sense, and they'd put it out there and then move on to the bulk of the Seerah, which is what they're good at. So it leaves the reader coming away with thinking, well, these are the gods they worship, what they look like, what their attributes were, how they were invoked, We don't know. How long they were worshipped for? We don't know. Where they originated from? We don't know. In fact, we tend to look at Arabia as a blank canvas. People think Arabia is a blank canvas. We mentioned writing. People thought it was a blank canvas. We mentioned Christianity and Judaism. People didn't know that Judaism and Christianity was that extensive in the Arabian Peninsula. Pagans surrounded by a sea of monotheists. Subhanallah. Now, again, when it comes to the pre-Islamic Arabian gods, we think blank canvas. But actually, there's a decent amount of information that we can glean. And it's very cool to have a look at that sort of stuff. So what did they teach us about worship, rites, temples, and religious way of life? Hardly anything. Hardly anything. They hardly touch on it. If they do, probably a few lines. That's it. So one famous personality is Hisham ibn al-Kalbi. His full name is Abul Mundir Hisham ibn Muhammad ibn Sa'ib ibn Bishr al-Kalbi. He's an Arab historian. Pardon my spelling mistakes. Deities. Let's just correct this as I work. So Al-Kalbi, he was an Arab historian from 737 to 819 AD, born in Kufa. He wrote his famous book. He wrote many things, but one of his most famous books is Kitab al-Asnam. It's actually quite a small book. There's not much information in there, but taken together with the epigraphic record, it marries together and it gives us some further insights. Showcases his understanding of pre-Islamic deities. So, because he undertook this study, we can possibly assume that he was more knowledgeable than everybody else on this subject and he had researched it a bit. So what he's showing us is most probably the extent of what anybody knew back then. And it's not much. The book lists idols and sanctuaries. He links the idols to tribes, sometimes provides information of how a shrine was destroyed. He describes 3 pre-Islamic sanctuaries called Kaaba, other than the one in Mecca. So then there's a second person by the name of Abu Muhammad al-Hasan ibn Ahmad ibn Yaqub al-Hamdani. Al-Hamdani in 893 and 947, so a generation or two after, he was a polymath. He wrote Geography of the Arabian Peninsula, Sifat Jazirat al-Arab. He described the geography and linguistic terrain in Arabia as well as Socotra. Socotra is an island of the Omani coast or the Yemeni coast, and it's in the Indian Ocean. The people there are not Arabs, and their language is it's a Semitic language, but it's far removed from Arabic and everything else. And he mentions this, but there seems to be some cognitive dissonance there. Even he does. In the last lesson we looked at it. He knew that it was not an Arabian language, but still people tend to place the Arabs in the south. In his Al-Iklil, we had a look at this book last time when we were looking at language. He discusses the genealogies of the Himyarites and their wars. Then there's an honorable mention, Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn Jarir ibn Yazid at-Tabari, 839 and 923. And then there's Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Ishaq ibn Yasir al-Muttalabi. These two guys, this is the Seerah, famous Seerah writer, and then there's At-Tabari, who also has a lot of information from the Seerah as well. They mention various gods and entities, and for sure you can see in Al-Kalbi's writings that he did use those as resources. So Kitab al-Asnam, let's have a look at his book Al-Kitab al-Asnam. Before we have a look, actually, we'll take the names of the idols from the book. So he has Isaf al-Na'ila, Sawa, Wad, Yughuth, Nas, Ri'am, Mana, Lat, Uzzā, Dhul Khalasa, Sa'ad, Dhul Kafain, Dhu Shara. Dhu Shara, that's Dashura. Okay, I didn't know he named that. Al-Uqsayr, Nohim, Aim, Su'air, Am Anas, the Kaaba of Najran, the Kaaba of Sinbad. Yes, you heard right. There was not just one Kaaba, there were other smaller Kaabas also in existence. Al-Qulais, Al-Qalis, that seems like the That's probably the church of Abraha. Al-Fa'al, Fa'ales al-Yabub and Bajar. Taken from Wikipedia, the North Arabians, Ma'adites, Madani, this is the Roman rendition of it. Pantheon includes the Nabateans, Palmyreans, and Kedarites. See, look, the Kedar is one of the progenitors of the Arabs, right? And he's from the north. And we looked at this when we looked at the origin of the Arabs. So again, this is another marker to prove that the Arabs came from the north. And they're tied in together with the North Arabians, the Nabateans who were Arabs, the Palmyreans who were Arabs and a mix of other people. Their gods were Abghal, Abirulu, Aim, Al-Lāt, Ammanis, Ara, Arsu, Asira. Let's just go through the list for the ones that concern us. That, Anwat, Dushara, Fils, Gad, Hubal, again Hubal, Asaf and Naila, Manaf, Manāt, Radu, and Uzzā. These are the ones that concern us. And then we have the South Arabians who are the Yemenite Homereti, Himyarites. Their pantheon, which is the other peoples that include this pantheon, would be the Sabaeans, Himyarites, the Manians, Katabanians, and the Hadrami people. All of them are not Arabs. Their gods are, look, the names are going to be very different now. Aim, Al-Maka, Am, Anbay. Am is Anku. Athirat, none of these gods concern us. Dhul Khalasa concerns us. Yu'ak and Yaguth and Wad and Yatha and Talib, and these concern us, and we'll look at why. Okay, so Saba worshipped Athtar, Haubas, Al-Maka, Dhat Imyan, Dhat Budanum, and this is obviously in Sabaean, and it's just the consonants. Hubas, Amlaka, Semin, Bitmani. Okay, that's how the names are written without the vowels. Kataban worshipped Athtar, Am, Anbi, Dhat, Anatum, and Dhat, Ahran, Tirmi, Nabi, Tent, whatever. This is again the most solemn inscriptions always call upon them in that order. So this is the order that they worship those gods in. There was an organized hierarchy, pantheon, and all pantheons have a hierarchical structure. Whereas the Arabs in the Hijaz, if we look at Al-Lāt, Manāt, Uzzā, there's no who is more. They're just known as the daughters of Allah. Even though they adopted these deities from the north, that's not how they were understood in the north, but that's how the Meccans understood them and people around them. So the list is actually too vast to complete, so we shall just do an overview and cover the idols that are mentioned in the Quran and that concern us, and some primary deities not mentioned in the Quran. So because all of the temples were destroyed, as we read the Seerah, we'd see where those temples were destroyed. We don't have any imagery, so we need to look outside of Arabia. If I told you what does the temple of Al-Lāt look like, you won't know. What did the temple of Al-Uzzā look like? Nobody knows. They've completely been destroyed. Their locations are known, but those sites have completely been destroyed. We can look at the Kaaba and see the simple construction of the Kaaba and understand that those temples would have probably been using the same kind of material and were constructed with base material that you find from the desert. Apart from that, we don't know anything else. We need to look outside of Arabia proper to see what the more influential, rich, civilized Arabs were doing, to glean ideas of what worship was like, what the structures were like, and how they understood those gods. Even though the structures would have been far more magnificent in the north than in the Hijaz or Arabia proper. So the main deities of the Arabian kingdom, so we had the Nabateans and let's start from north working south. I normally like working from south to north, but let's work from the north to south. The Nabateans and the Kedarites, again, similar people, Arabs, the early Arabs. They worship Dashura. Dashura is what we know it as today. Dhu Ash-Sha'r, meaning he of the mountains. He of the mountains was the tutelar god of the Nabateans. Ata Samin, and in Hatra, Shamas, they worship the sun. And Dhu Gabat in the Hijaz, the Lahyanites worship that, Dhu Sam. And then Going south, Du Samawi, he of the sky. We mentioned this last lecture, right? If you remember. And Wad, Al-Makkah, and Am, Anku, and Sayan all worshipped in the south, even though some of these gods originated way back in history up in the north we look at. And Kal again Shams. Here's the massive Kinda confederation, and then the Ma'in, Saba, Kataban, Hadramaut, the non-Arab peoples of the south. Lehianites is the northern part of Hijaz, and then before you hit the Nabatean realm, and the Kedarites, which is like right on the edge of the Hijaz, and then it starts the second, the Jordanian desert. So, which is actually an extension of the Arabian desert. Al-Makkah, his votive stele with Sabine inscription addressed to the moon god Al-Makkah. So Al-Makkah was a moon god, and we have a very clear inscription, a monumental inscription here in Musnad script, which is readable and it's very easy to see and read and translate. This inscription mentions 5 South Arabian gods, 2 reigning sovereigns and 2 governors. Ami Amar, son of Mu'ad Akarib, dedicated to Al-Makkah, Rasumumu with Athtar with Al-Makkah, with that Himyam, with that Badan, with Wadum, with Karib El, with Samuali, Aili, with Amurayam and Yad Rah Malik. This is 700 BC in the area of Moab. This is very old, very, very old. 2,700 years old, 5 gods, 2 kings, and whatnot is mentioned here. This is the Temple of Awam. The Temple of Awam is a massive structure, also spelled Awam, and no, it's not the Pillars of Iran. They even call it Mahram Bilqis. It's a Sabaean Bilqis was the queen of Sheba, Saba. A temple dedicated to the principal deity of Saba, Al-Makkah, near Ma'rib in what is now Yemen. It was made about the time of the emergence of the Sabaean culture, so it's very, very old. And it's been expanded over the time. Around the beginning of the first millennium BCE, the temple continued to operate up to the end of the 4th century CE. So it's been in existence for a very long time. We think the Kaaba is very old. The Kaaba has been there for a very long time, and this has been there also for a very long time. But maybe some sites, like this site, the Kaaba was rebuilt by Ibrahim al-Islam. Rebuilt or built as a first time. So the Kaaba was built by him. Before that, there was no Kaaba there. And this temple is going back 3,000 years. Ibrahim alayhi salam was around 3,500, 4,000 years, right? I'm not too sure. So this temple is very close in date to the construction of the Kaaba. And for sure, there's probably older temples there, probably not in use, that predate the Kaaba, or probably continuously in use up till the time of the calling of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A very interesting thing to think about. The Wendell Phillips expedition. Wendell Phillips left for Ma'rib in northern Yemen in the spring of 1951. Only the tops of the temple's 8 massive pillars and the upper sections of an oval wall remained visible. The focus of this expedition was the Awam Temple, the largest of its kind on the Arabian Peninsula. Workers painstakingly removed the wind-blown sand before the expedition team uncovered a large hall lined with monumental pillars, stairways, impressive bronze and alabaster sculptures, and numerous inscriptions. It's actually a good thing that the sands covered these things for a millennia, because today we can excavate them and read the inscriptions. In the past, people would recycle materials. The same thing with the Sphinx; it was covered up to its head. The pyramids, nobody really went there for. The bottom layers were probably covered, and in Iraq and the Sumerians, Babylonians, and a lot of these things are underground. Even with the Egyptians, many things are underground. It's actually a good thing because it preserves them, and where today we have the technology to revive those things and then preserve them properly, whereas in the past they would have probably got destroyed. This is the temple complex, massive temple complex, right? I mean, it's much bigger than the Kaaba area traditionally back then. This is an aerial view. Enclosure wall by Mukarrib Yad el Zarith in the middle of the 7th century BCE. So this wall is 2,700 years old. That means this site was bigger than the holy precinct in Mecca. The holy precinct in Mecca is very small compared to this, indicating much earlier period of the temple's construction. So it went back even further in time. This is the temple site. And here's the staircase. The gate along building A has locking devices, so apparently these could be closed if necessary. A double inscription. There's an inscription there, and the inscription mentions the dedication of a horse statue to Al-Makkah. The Nafan gate is visible in the lower background of the two podia. Here is the inscription on it. The 7th century BCE cemetery is attached to the oval sanctuary and apparently accessed only through a gate in the western wall of the protective enclosure and restricted to funerary rites usage. The cemetery tombs were multi-story structures up to 4 stories high, and external walls were sometimes decorated with friezes and low relief of the dead's face. A very advanced civilization, as we can see. One of the severed bronze statues that were part of numerous discoveries by the American Foundation for the Study of Man that was led by Wendell Phillips, excavated of Awam. This was excavated there. According to legend, Ma'rib was the capital of the Sabaean kingdom ruled by the biblical queen of Sheba. Sabaean inscriptions refer to it as the temple of Al-Makkah, the moon god, who was the principal deity of Moab. So this is a statue that they found there. If we look at what he's wearing the futa, which is to this day what the Yemenis and the southern Arabians wear. And Rasulullah also had this dress. And he must have worn it at least once because whoever gave it to him, he honored them by wearing it. The Arabs generally wore a futa anyway. The long thobe that we know today, the pristine white thobe, is not what the Arabs of old wore. The Arabs wore a futa and then an overshirt. And we looked at this in the pictures earlier on in the videos as well. So this, he's wearing a futa, he's wearing some kind of something up his shins, the back of his legs, and he's wearing like is it a cloak or something? Because it looks like he's giving a piggy bank to a child, and there's also like hands going around his waist. It's probably not hands; it's something he's wearing. And if you look at the hairstyle, that's typical Yemeni hairstyle. If Arabs let their hair grow, it becomes like this. Sabine inscription addressed to the god Al-Makkah, mentioning 5. We had a look at this. This is another picture of it. This is also a picture of it. The site. There they're copying inscriptions off the wall, so it's like a tracing kind of a thing. The oldest inscription found in the complex was in reference to the building of the temple's massive enclosure known as the Great Wall of Awam by Makarib Yada el-Dara in the middle of the 7th century BCE, indicating a much earlier period for the temple's construction. Yada el inscription was carved outside the wall and contains the following. Yada el-Dara, son of Yumu alay Mukarib of Saba, walled Awam, the temple of Al-Makkah, when he sacrificed to Athtar and when he established the whole community by a god and a patron and a pact and a secret treaty by Athtar and by Hawbas and by Al-Makkah, mentioning various gods here. So can it be true that this structure is older than the Kaaba? Further research needs to be done here. It's certainly interesting to know of this. All we need to do is know when Ibrahim al-Islam was around, and the earliest bits of information we can find, like from the rock and everything, about when this temple was constructed. This is the temple of Makeba in Makeba Ga'iba. This is in the Aksum kingdom, the old Aksum kingdom. So this is in either Eritrea or in Ethiopia. This is, you can see the Muslim script on there as well. Obviously the greater civilizations, ideas and culture and language penetrated across the Arabian Peninsula into Africa as well. And they had their own language, Ge'ez, which is a related cousin language anyway to the southern languages. This is, you can see the kind of water spout. So this is where libations and stuff like ritual, probably sacrifice or offerings were, certainly offerings were given to the god here. This is a miniature shrine with an effigy on the left. You can see the temple here, and there's that box you can see as well clearly. And the runoff goes into something into the ground. Now the 5 idols mentioned in Surah Nuh. In Surah Nuh, Allah mentions 5 idols: Wood, Suwa, Sawa, Yaghuth, Yuk, and Nasr. The only name that makes sense here is Nasr, which means eagle, if that is what it still means. These were the 5 deities that the peoples of Noah used to worship, the 5 prime deities. And Allah mentions and said, never leave your gods. So they are saying to each other, never leave your gods and never leave Wood or Sawa or Yaghut, Yat Nasr. So never leave your gods means that they had other gods, and then they had these 5 gods that are named. Now, in the 3rd century, why am I mentioning this? Is because we find reference to some of these deep in the south, and it's astonishing how that can be, and we will look at that when we get there, once we've read this. So in the 3rd century CE, the Sabaeans began to give the principal god Al-Makkah the title Lord in the same period. In the inscriptions dedicated to him in the temple of Awam, they ceased to invoke the other divinities of the pantheon. Was this a solely Christian influence, or was it themselves moving and evolving towards monotheism? Not evolving, not in man just does that. No, it can be a case of they knew of one God, and then they devolved, whatever you want to call it, into multi-pantheon gods, and then for some reason they moved back the other way again. So I'm going to use the word evolved that way. Was it because of the Judo-Christian experience, or was it just something else, like the idea of slowly moving towards God, one God setting the stage 200-300 400 years later for the coming of Rasulullah, 200-300 years later for the coming of Rasulullah. We looked at this in the previous lecture, how the inscriptions all started to refer to one God. So it's very interesting. The area becomes, they start to call upon one God, monotheism. The Hanif movement develops. On top of that, the Arabic language develops to its pinnacle around 100 years before Rasulullah. You can say that all of this was setting the stage for the birth of the Rasulullah. Something again to think about and to investigate further. Some information in passing from Ibn al-Kalbi. We shall read what he has to say and connect ourselves to the past. So we're going to read, because you're reading a primary, at least in the Arabian context, a primary source text, and it connects you to the past. So we shall read it. So Sawa, the god Sawa. So remember these 5 gods? We'll start with Sawa in Ibn Kalbi's book. You can download this book, by the way, Kitab al-Islam, the Book of Idols, PDF, search it, you can download it. The Khudail adopted Sawa as their god and placed it in Rohat in the vicinity of Yambo, one of the villages of Medina. The custodians of its temple were the Banu Lihyan. However, I have not heard any mention of it in the poems of the Khudailites. I did, however, hear of it in a poem by a certain man from Yemen. So where was Sawa originally? With the people of Noah. That's Mesopotamia. So it's above the deserts of Jordan and the North Hijaz area, for sure. Yet, when the flood was a couple of thousand years before, or probably more, 3,000-4,000 years before his time, and he's talking about in Yambo was the place of worship for this. So already we can see it's descended down. That means it was probably worshipped even further down, and it's been attested. He said he also heard of it in the Yemen. Wad, the Kaib adopted Wad as their god. That was his Dumatul Jundal. Dumatul Jundal is in the north. He only has this information, and he says that this is, and Ibn Ishaq has something where he talks about Prophet sent them to destroy this place or something like this. We will look at. Yet, when we look at the epigraphic record and we dug in that area, we found only crosses. It seems like it was only a Christian site. And we know Christianity was in the area. We only found evidence in the epigraphic record for Christianity, nothing for this god. Was it this god or was it Radu actually? Radu, I'm sure it was Radu. In Damatul Jandal, also Radu, they say he was worshipped there, and they only found evidence of not Radu, but Christian crosses. So it was a Christian place of worship. So according to him, this god was worshipped in Dummat al-Jandal. The Madhij, and this is Yaghut now, the Madhij as well as the people of Yarash adopted Yaghut as their god. Said the poet, may God keep thee and bless thee, for to us it is unlawful with women to daily and wanton, thus our fate has resolved. Said another, Yaqut led us unto the Murad, and we vanquished them before the morning. Venerated according to him by the Madij tribe and the people of Jarash, that is by the people who were living at Najran and in Asir in Ibn Kalbi's area. So an attestation of it very far in the southern peninsula, but it originated in the north. Yuak, the Huwayan adopted Yuak as their god. It was placed in a village of theirs called Huwayan at a distance of 2 nights' journey towards Mecca. I have not heard of the Hamdan or of any other tribe amongst the Arabs naming any of their members after Yuak, such as, for example, Abdul Yuak. Or have I ever heard of any mention of Yuak in their poetry? I think this is because they were situated close to Sana'a and consequently mixed with the Himyar and embraced Judaism with them at the same time, when Dunuwas accepted the religion of Israel and converted his followers to it. So he's saying that he never heard anything. His possible understanding is because they converted to a monotheistic religion. Yaqut, worshipped by Hamdan and the Yemeni allies at Khawayan, a small village 100 kilometers north of Sana'a. The Himyarites adopted Nasr as their god and worshipped it in a place called Balkha. I have not, however, heard of the Himyar naming any of their members after Nasr, nor have I heard of any mention of Nasr in the poetry of the Arabs. So it's interesting his observations here, because if these gods were worshipped in these areas, you would come across names, theophoric names, but he's not hearing those names. He says, I think this is because the Himyarites relinquished idolatry and embraced Judaism during the reign of Tubba. Very thirsty today, my lips are dry. Nasr, the eagle god, worshipped by the Himyarites at Balkha, a location which has not been identified. Yaquth, Yog, and Nasr are 3 of the 5 idols mentioned by Noah in Nuh alayhi salam, yani the Surah of Nuh. There is no mention of Yaguth in descriptions of South Arabia. His name occurs only in the Safietic inscriptions. So the name of this god has not been attested in the south. However, it's been attested in the Safietic Arabic inscriptions in the far north of Syria and Jordan, where it is a anthroponym. Elsewhere we find Marwat as a man's name in 3 Nabatean inscriptions consisting of Mar in the Arabic Imru. So Mar, Imru, Maut, and Yot writing, Yagut, the Aramaic way of writing Yagut. So Imru, Yagu, how to pronounce this? Imru Yagut, I'll just say. So in the north, it's attested. Abu Yoguth recurs 42 times, 18 of these in the Madhish genealogies. It is possible that a god Yaguth, apparently an individual who had been made a hero, existed and was commonly known amongst the Nabateans and Madhij. The name Yuk does not occur in Arabian epigraphy except as the name of a synagogue, Maghrib, built in January 465 CE, which is 574 of the Himyarite era at Al-Ula, 12 kilometers northwest of Sana'a. Al-Ula is a place in the North Arabia next to Taima also. It's the new name for Didan. But there's a place in the south there as well. Nasr was worshipped by the southern Arabs, especially in Aramaut, and this is Hadramaut, is it? Aramaut and at As-Sabah. But the link with the mysterious Balkha made by Ibn al-Kalbi seems without foundation. So now we're looking at the epigraphic record with what al-Kalbi saying and trying to marry them together. Let's move on. Re'am. The Himyar had also another temple. The Himyar had also another temple in Sana'a. It was called Re'am. The people venerated it and offered in it sacrifices. According to one report, they used to receive communications from an oracle therein. When the Tuba returned from the expedition to Al-Iraq, the 2 rabbis who accompanied him to Medina came along with him to destroy Re'am, and he told them, do with it whatever you wish. Remember, we mentioned this story last lesson. We'll have a look at it again, probably in the Seerah, where the Tuba of Yemen invaded as far as Medina, and then his son was killed, and then 2 Jewish rabbis were given to him, and he took them down south and they converted the people into Judaism. Furthermore, the Arabs preserved nothing of its poetry except these poems which belong to the period immediately preceding it. Hisham Abu al-Mundir said, I have not heard a single verse of poetry in description of Ra'im. I have, however, heard some in description of the others. These then are the 5 idols which the people of Noah used to worship. For this reason, God mentioned them in his book, which he revealed to his prophet. Said Noah, O Lord, they rebel against me, and they followed those whose riches and children do but aggravate their ruin. And they plotted a great plot, and they said, forsake not your gods, forsake not Wad, Sawa, Yaghuth, Yuak, and Nasr, and they cause many to err, and thou too shalt be the means of increasing only in error and the wicked. When therefore Amr ibn Luhay bought the idols from Al-Balka, they accepted and worshipped them. So this is what he said. That all makes sense, but the last part, when therefore Amr ibn Luhay bought the idols from Al-Balkha, they accepted and worshipped them. This is problematic. We'll have a look at this why when we get there. Regarding Ra'im ibn al-Kalbi, a little better informed, he is aware that it is a temple in the province of Sana'a, but he does not know the name of the god. When you copy and paste from the actual book, it just makes many mistakes. He is aware that it is a temple in the province, but he does not know the name of the god to whom this building is dedicated. The ancient temple was in fact called Turat, and the god worshipped there was Talab Riyam. His epithet eventually came to indicate both the building and the mountain upon which is located, modern day Jabal Riyam, 5 kilometers north of Sana'a. Then there's Anas, Uncle Anas. What a name for a deity, right? Uncle Anas. The Khawalin had in the land of Khawlan an idol called Anas. They were wont to set apart a portion of their livestock, property and land products and give one part of it and the other to God. Whatever portion of the part allotted to Anas made its way to the part consecrated to God, made its way to the part allotted to the idol, they would leave it to the idol. They were a clan of the Khawlan called Al-Adim who are Al-Usum. Concerning them, followers, the following verses was revealed. Moreover, they set apart a portion of the fruit and cattle which he had produced, and say, this for God, so deem they, and these for our associates. But that which is for these associates of theirs cometh not to God, yet that which is for God cometh to the associates. Ill do they judge. This is a Quranic verse. It's in relation to what the pagans were doing. And this can be applied to any pagan anywhere in the world, because they apportion gods, they apportion sacrifices for gods and then for the high God. And nothing reaches anybody. What you sacrifice for Allah, Allah is not in need of it, but the action is a form of worship. When you sacrifice for the other gods and you offer the other gods, nothing is reaching any God. Hassan ibn Thabit addressed Al-Uzzā, which was in Mecca. He said, through the grace of God, I testify that Muhammad is the apostle of him who reigneth above the heavens, and that Zacharias and his son John have worshipped him with acceptable and meritorious works. And that withstandest by the dam in the valley of Nakhla, and those who worship her are removed from truth hopelessly lost. Sometimes Al-Kalbi will give information. Most classical texts do this. They'll give information, but they expect you to know, they expect you to fill in the gaps, because it's one scholar writing for another scholar. What the context of this is, I don't know. Finally, there is no epigraphic evidence of Anas, but the existence of such a divinity cannot be ruled out, because we know of a Khawalite leader of his name in the 3rd century CE. Anas could have been an ancestor or a deified hero. Ibn al-Kalbi, or his source, thus provides more or less accurate information regarding 4 of the 5 divinities. So here now we've got the epigraphic record, Ibn al-Kalbi, and they've married the information together and they've come to the conclusion that 4 out of 5 of the deities he had accurate information from. Well done, al-Kalbi, well done, 4 out of 5 stars. Ibn al-Kalbi ignores all the major divinities of the ancient kingdom, notably Alqama. So how he ended up doing this, I don't know. Alqama, Saba, which was in the tutelar god of Saba, Am in Kataban, Sayin, Aramot, which would be Hadramaut, right? Pardon the copy and paste. Athtar Dhul Kabun in Ma'an and Balu. His knowledge is thus extremely incomplete. He is more concerned with providing details of the idols mentioned in the Quran or traditions rather than with researching first-hand information. So he probably did know, but he didn't complete the information. He was more concerned in finding information on the northern deity, should we say. Hassan al-Hamdani, he's the other guy. In addition to a fairly accurate description of the Temple of Rayam, he mentions the names of three South Arabian divinities reinterpreted as anthroponyms: Sinan, Dhu Ilm, and the king of Hadramaut. In ancient times, Ayin Dut him in the Hadramaut inscriptions. Talab Rayam bin Shahran, who is supposed to have married Turah, a misunderstanding of the divine title Talab Rayamun, Lord of Turat, in which the word Ba'al, Lord, has been taken to mean spouse. This is interesting. This word Ba'al is still used with the Arabs to mean spouse. Ba'al is actually also God, a northern god. Baal, they know it as. Baal Shamim. Alkama, the Sabaean god Alkama, identified with Balkis, the traditional name of the queen of Sheba. So it's interesting. We know that Sheba was originally a pagan. She went to see Sulaiman alayhi salam and she became a Muslim, a mu'min, a believer. And what god would she have worshipped before this? Alkama, the primary god of the Sabaeans. In his Kitab al-Juharatain, he observes the sun, the moon, and the stars were depicted on the silver and gold coinage of the Himyarites because they worshipped them. They called them Aftar, Hubas, and Alkama. This is why Bilqis is called Yalmaka. They call Astar, Hubas, and Alkama the stars in the singular, Almak and Yalmak. This is why Bilqis is called Yalmaka, and one speaks of Zohra, Venus. Al-Hamdani not only knew that Almaka was a divinity and not a queen, he also knew the gods Astar and Hubas, whose name appears in no other Islamic source. Yemeni authors are thus a little better informed concerning the paganism of South Arabia than in the rest of the Islamic tradition. He is originally Yemeni and he could read the Musnad, as we mentioned in the previous lecture, 2 lectures before. Yemeni authors are thus a little better informed concerning the paganism of South Arabia. Thus, in the rest of the Islamic tradition, they know the names of several important divinities such as the principal gods of Saba, Aramot, and Sami, whereas Ibn al-Kalbi only refers to minor divinities. Their knowledge is nonetheless limited to a few divine names and some uncertain identifications. Rather than vague recollections from memory, we are talking of names they have deciphered from inscriptions and interpreted more or less accurately. They were indeed able to read the South Arabian script, although they often confused letters of a similar shape and interpreted the text very freely. The feeble knowledge is explained that paganism was rejected from 250 in Himyar and it only survived underground or in outlying tribes. So after this date, Judaism appeared and then Christianity appeared, and the elites, the aristocracy and the nobles and everybody of worth and reputable note ended up becoming monotheist. And when the tribal leaders become monotheists, everybody follows suit. But the worship of these gods must have remained, in like the outlying provinces and village people and by simple people. A large number of divinities were only worshipped by single kingdoms such as Al-Makkah, which was worshipped by Sabah, and Am, Kataban, and Sayin, Hadramaut, Aramot, others such as Wadum and Lat Imyan in many. Only one, Athta, which is written TR, is common to the entire population of South Arabia. A single divinity common to several groups is often individualized by qualifying name or title. Athta, for example, is always qualified by Dhu Qabun. That's how it's written, QBM. So that's why it becomes very difficult to translate these inscriptions, because you're only looking at consonants as opposed to vowels. So it's hard enough guessing what's in the middle, but you have to guess if a vowel came before and at the end, and it makes it incredibly difficult. The word Allah is basically written L-H or L even. So you have to work out this is Al-Ilah. So when describing the principal god of the kingdom of Ma'an, the title often denotes the name or location of a sanctuary and sometimes both. As with Talab Raymun, Lord of the Temple of Kadman. Right, so for some uncommon divinities, the texts make explicit mention of their tribe of origin, such as Dhu al-Samawi. Last lesson we looked at this. he of the heavens, the heavenly one, who is often called God of the tribe of Amir, Amirum, an Arab tribe based between Ajawf and Najran. Right, so interesting. This is an Arab tribe, and they have a God that sounds similar to a Muslim would call Rabbus Samawat wal Ard, Lord of the heavens and the earth, Allah. What the linkage is here, we don't know, but it's interesting that this is not a South Arabian proper deity. It's a deity of the Arabs that were in that area. Was that a corruption of knowing who God was once upon a time, and they corrupted it to form this deity? His principal temple was located at the heart of Amirun in Wadi Shuaif, some 60 miles north of Ajawf, but some sanctuaries were also depicted by him by other tribes elsewhere at Haram, at Ma'rib, and Tamna, and at Sawaman. Some divinities are not exclusively Yemeni. There is evidence for the god Wudam in the Persian Gulf, so it came from the north, and it's something that spread from the south to the north or north to the south. And according to tradition, he was also worshipped by the Kalb ad-Dummat al-Jandal. The gods Sayam and Anbi had corresponding gods in Mesopotamia, Sin and Nabu. Right, when I hear this, you got to take this information with a piece of salt. Why? Because Orientalists have a habit of compartmentalizing things into neat packages because it just fits better. You know, there's no loose ends. But history doesn't work like that. What they do is they see a god, for example, they look at Al-Lāt, and they look at how Al-Lāt functions and was worshipped and her attributes, and they link it with Athena, a god that the Greeks had. Or another god, Dashura, for example, may not be true, with Jupiter. So this is exactly what's happening here. They have corresponding gods, but those corresponding gods, you cannot say that, oh, there's a god called Lat, and oh yeah, actually she's Athena. No, why would she be Athena? Athena is a different god, understood differently with different attributes, even if there's similarities. Athena is Athena, and Lat is a different deity. So when you read Orientalist works, especially Orientalist works, be careful about finding similarities and then saying, oh yeah, this is the counterpart over there. So this is the same kind of, it's the same God really. No, it's not the same God. So had a corresponding gods in Mesopotamia, Sin and Nabu. The gods Sar and Ramman, just like the goddess Athirat in the Near East, Sha'ar and Athirat in Ugarit, Ashira in the Bible. Either it's the same deity with a different name, or it's different deities that they're just finding correspondences with. Ashira in the Bible, Ramon as an epithet of the Aramaic god Haddad. The most widespread divinity was Athta with a dual male and female aspect, as can be seen in An-Ugarit and Amwat, even if one of the two is very often dominant. Right, so unless it's the same name attested in the north, we know it's the same deity. So this the female aspect only in Mesopotamia, whereas in the south it was the male and female dual aspect that they understood it by. A large number of divinities do not have proper names, but are indicated by a quality. So wudum, this is an attribute. Wud, Arabic love. A family relationship, uncle, on the father's side. A local and perhaps sometimes by a quality or a function introduced by theopronouns. He who or she who, Dhual Samawi or Dhual Kabum, That Imyan, That Badanum, etc. Most likely the real names of these divinities were taboo. The same phenomenon can be seen in the Arabian desert with Allah, Lat, Uzzā. So like Allah means the God. It's a proper pronoun for Allah. It's not just an attribute, it's a proper pronoun, Allah. Lat, goddess, it's an attribute. And Al-Uzzā, the most powerful, an attribute. And all the other names with Dhu or That. So for example, That Anwa, That Al-Kibat, Dhu Al-Khalasa, we had this name in the Seerah, Dhu Al-Kafain or Dhu Al-Laba. But tribes, towns, clans, lineages, and families had their own cults, as I mentioned. And these were added to the collective rights of the kingdom. It follows from this that the structure of the divine world faithfully reflected the organization of society. The same phenomenon can be seen elsewhere in Arabia, for example, in the Yathrib oasis when Muhammad arrived there. This gives us some idea at least how they were structured. So we've gone through a massive list, massive as opposed to knowing just 4 idols, Lat, Manāt, Uzzā, and Hubal. Most people, they only know this. Now we've seen a large list of deities that are attested and that were known to the early Muslims that were worshipped in the south. Some minor divinities were divided into 4 classes. So we have Bait. Is that Bait or Bint? This is in the Sabine language, so I won't be able to translate this. These were entrusted with the protecting of palaces, temples, family groups, and individuals. So lesser gods, demigods, if you may. Some have double names, such as those of mere mortals, in which we can see a divine name such as Al-Zizza Lat, power of Al-Lāt. How Wafil has saved, El has saved, Lahyathat, Ahtar shines. These are theophoric names. His name knew, and he knew his name. These are probably deified individuals, ancestors, or heroes. A relatively large number of divinities have no clear link with any particular tribal entity. These apparently include the daughters of El. Now, these daughters of El are not like what the Arabs knew as up in the north, the Hijazis knew as daughters of Allah, as in Lat, Manāt, and Uzzā. These are something else, mostly worshipped by women. Their names suggest that they were a class of supernatural entities acting as intermediaries between human beings and the assembly of gods. Other unnamed divinities can also be added, who may be identified by a parental relationship with the divinity, son of Hubas, mother of Athtar, or mother of goddess. He who is at Raidan, the lord of Aran, the lord of Barum, the lord of Yafan, the lord of Adusum, the mistress of Ardath, she's she who is from Arbum, the god in the chapel of worshippers. So these are the names that they're known under. So deities borrowed from the Arabs. These were introduced after Arab tribes settled in the lowlands of Yemen from the 2nd century BCE. So Arabs have been attested of having been in the area from the 2nd century BCE. Coming from where? Coming from the north, bringing with them their language and some of their gods. Dhu as-Samawi, the Amir god of Kahilan, Al-Lāt, Manāt, and Uzzā. So these 3 gods were brought from the north. And it's interesting, Dhu as-Samawi. I would like to do more information on who this god is, because Rabbus Samawat wal Ard is Allah. And then He of the heavens. Right? Where did this idea originate from with these Arabs? For me, this just lends more credence that the Arabs are from the north, because they have an identifying mark to this God that Muslims have, Lord of the heavens and the earth. So is this a corruption of something? Al-Uzzā in Sabiyan, Uzzayan. Remember we said the definite causes. So in the northern Arabic dialect, Al-Uzzā, the definite article Al is in the beginning. In the south, the definite article becomes An, and it's at the end. So Uzzā would be Uzzān, Uzzayan, right? And it's written ZYN. So when you see ZYN on an inscription, it's saying Al-Uzzā basically. It's the only Arab divinity along with Dhu Samawi whose cult was worshipped in South Arabia. There is evidence for her in 12 texts, 2 of which are fragmentary. 5 commemorate offerings in one of her temples. 2 on amulets call upon her as a protectress, and 3 call upon her as the guardian divinity of the final royal palace of Kataban. The name Uzzayan is also found in several theophoric anthrophonemes, almost all relating to the same inscription. An onomastic Uzzayan first appeared in South Arabia in the 3rd century BCE. This was not far from Najran, a region inhabited by North Arabian tribes. So Najran sits on its own just outside Yemen proper. And it's still a farming community, but it faces the desert. So in this area, above this area, Arabs were there, attested from the 3rd century BCE, bringing their god Uzzā with them. And as-Samawi, the first sign of a cult, a dedication in a sanctuary consecrated by the goddess, comes from Kataban, dating from the 2nd century BCE. Al-Lāt, Al-Lāt in Sabaean, Latan, written LTN, and Lat obviously is written LT, we know this, who was worshipped in northwestern Arabia, that's the Hijaz, and among the Arabs of the Near East, does not seem to have been the object of an organized cult in South Arabia. The only indications of veneration are two amulets. The name of the goddess is written once with the article N and once without. The goddess, however, seems to have been extremely popular amongst the Arab tribes on the northern borders of Yemen, than among the southern Arabians themselves. Judging by theophors, with Lat of which there are dozens, the appearance of these theophors in a Jove may be dated to the 2nd century BCE. Manāt, South Arabian Manāt. Remember we said about the language, Manāt in the old language, the waw would still be there, whose cult is well documented among the Palmyrenes and in northwestern Arabia, notably at Tayma and Al-Hijr. So Manāt is well documented among the Palmyrenes and in northwestern Arabia, notably at Tayma and Al-Hijr, makes almost no appearance in the epigraphic records of South Arabia. At present, there is only a single reference in a text from Ma'an dating from the 5th century BCE. That's a very old date. This occurrence, seemingly older than everything found elsewhere, suggests that Manāt was a divinity of Ragmat, the ancient name of Najran. Najran is the modern name, Nagran, slightly older, and Nagmat. So she was a divinity of Nagmat. Similarly, the name Manat appears in several anthrophonemes from the Najran region in its broadest sense. These three goddesses introduced by the Arabs should be distinguished from the daughters of El, all the known South Arabian divinities. Had a positive or protective role, evil powers are alluded to in invocations but are never personified. Sanctuaries came in different sizes and structures. They could be located in towns, outside the walls, in the countryside, on top of mountains. Certain temples and sanctuaries display features which can be found in the Meccan Aram. The temple Irwa, 90 kilometers off Sana'a, with a half-oval precinct, recalls the form Hijr and is bound by a semicircular cloister. The low walls which enclose the sanctuary of Jabal al-Lawath seem comparable to the Arish, the building with no roof, with low walls that cattle can step over, which stood there prior to the Kaaba. The second perimeter of the sanctuary of Darb Albi of Sana'a and Yathlil is marked by boundary stones, 9 are preserved. Okay, so there's nothing probably new here. So we have the Kaaba, we have the holy house, and then we have the sanctuary, the inviolable sanctuary. We have the inviolable months. And it seems like these ideas permeated, it's an ancient idea, and it permeated the north and the south. And you could see this in their sanctuaries and in some of the things that they do in the north and the south. So most rituals, so what were the rituals like for these people? So we know the names of the gods. We know where they originated from. We have some temple remains. We've seen the attestations, and what were the rituals like? Most rituals were the presenting of offerings commemorated by an inscription. Offerings could be people who enter into the service or produce. Just before Christianity, offerings of people were changed to statuettes called salam. In Arabic, sanam, salmat, when a woman was concerned. So the offering could be a person, so putting them in service of this temple. Afterwards, just make a statue and put the statue there, and you don't need to do the service. The statue can do it for you. There was a great pilgrimage called Hadr and Muffar or Hag. Al-Makkah at Mariam pilgrimage time was Dhu Abi in July, so period of the rains. So here we have the pilgrimage of this goddess was in the period of the rains. Let's just crack this. Sorry, I just need to correct some of this. It's been copy and pasted and it doesn't paste that well. It's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? It's supposed to be teaching here, and then I've made a mess of the slides. So the Hajj, the pilgrimage was at this site. So you can imagine at this time there were multiple pilgrimages. There were pilgrimages to the Holy House in Mecca. There were pilgrimages to these sites, and there was more than one Kaaba, like a sanctuary. Another, the pilgrimage of Al-Makkah, is known because of two references. The principal god Sami Thalab Rayamun was visited at Mount Torat, modern-day Jabal Rayam, 50 kilometers from Sana'a, and the Abyan temple of Adakan, 30 kilometers north of Sana'a. Finally, a pilgrimage in honor of Dhut Samawi took place at Yath'il. Apart from Sabah, the only known pilgrimage is of Sayan at Shabuat. The divinity provided oracles and issued commandments. He or she was asked to provide rain. So they would ask for rain, the general things that what people need. In a ceremony called istisqa. In Arabic, we call it istisqa. It's the prayer for rain, and there's some ceremony attached to it in the sense that you are supposed to be wearing your most oldest clothes, the most tattered and dusty clothes, and you take out everybody. You take out the men folk, the women folk, the children, even the animals you take out, and then you present yourself before God, and you can imagine the noise of the animals, the noise of the children, women wailing, and you're begging Allah, oh Allah, give us rain, give us rain, give us rain. This is istisqa, the prayer of rain. Traditionally, this is how it's done. And they obviously prayed for rain in a ceremony, and the Arabs call it istisqa. During particular ceremonies, water prayer formulas. Several texts mention the practice of divination. We know this, that they divined. We can just have a look at other religions. Look at paganism in Rome, in ancient Greece, in modern India, and all pagan festivals are similar. Paganism in Europe. Although this is difficult to identify precisely, South Arabians definitely offered blood sacrifices, but there are few allusions to this apart from some Minian inscriptions. Fumigation and libation. Fumigation is where you have perfume, right? So people even do this in Europe now. Let's fumigate the house, get rid of bad spirits and evil energy like this. Or if the house is possessed, they go and fumigate it with sage and something like this. Libation is dropping water. So you can make a prayer and drop water on the floor, or you can drop it into like a cistern and it rolls out, as we saw there. Libation. Representation of divinities. Statues adorn temples and palaces. Images of the dead were placed in tombs. Very few images of divinities. So there were statues, but they were very few of the actual goddess or god itself. Some coins of smaller size also depict Sayin in the shape of a bull. Other divinities must also have appeared in the shape of a bull, such as Thawar. Thawar in Arabic means bull. Baal bull lord. So Baal is, the meaning here is Lord, associated with and then identified as Al-Maqa, bull of Abu. Comparison with the ritual practice of pre-Islamic Hijaz. Right, so let's compare how the south compares to the Hijaz area. Similar rituals of purity were observed in the south and in the north. In Aram, the area where the idols of Isaf and Naila stood, in the Haram. So Isaf and Naila were two deities. We'll talk about them as we get there. The area where the idols Isaf and Naila stood was out of bounds for menstruating women. So menstruating women were not allowed there. Menstruating women are not allowed in mosques today as well. And this rule applied to all the idols if we are to believe Ibn al-Kalbi. A South Arabian inscription from Ajaf echoes an identical prohibition. So the same in pre-Islamic Arabia, in modern Islam, and in the South Arabian pantheon worship ways, a menstruating woman couldn't go near the idols. Muslim women cannot go to mosques. People coming to Mecca were given milk and honey. In the south, they were given bread, milk. Covering of the Kaaba with hangings, the Kiswa had its parallel in the south too. 3 inscriptions from Kataban commemorate the offering of Kiswa to lesser divinities. It is not known, however, whether these Kiswat were intended to cover the god or his dwelling place. Interesting. Isaf and Naila. Isaf and Naila are 2 idols. Isaf and Naila are basically 2 idols, a man and a woman, that were on the hills of Safa and Marwa. So if we imagine the Kaaba here, and then you have the 2 hills where you have to then go 7 times. Behind that is the house of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So you can just imagine that Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, from his house, as he left his house to go to the holy precinct, he could see Safa and Marwa. And back then they were higher than they are today. How big were these idols? Could he also see these idols? Probably at least man shape, right? Man size on top of there. He probably could. And he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was displeased. Every time he stepped out of his house, he wanted to see the Kaaba, and then your eye falls on these 2 idols, and then the Kaaba, or the Kaaba and then these 2 idols, and then as you get close, you're surrounded by other idols. So it's probably a depressing sight for Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, the thing about this story is that this is the story of a man and a woman that wanted a place to have sexual relations, and the only place they found was inside the Kaaba. So what Allah did is Allah turned them into pillars of stone. And those pillars were placed on both of those rocks, the hillocks, and after a time people started worshipping them. Now, everybody will narrate this story. I think it's utter nonsense. Why? Because if it's come down to us that this is what the pre-Islamic Arabs were doing, the pre-Islamic Arabs are narrating this story and it's coming down to us, and they knew that these are a promiscuous couple, and we're just worshipping 2 men, 2 humans, a man and a woman. So it defies logic. Sometimes we need to apply logic into what we're reading and understanding. This story is a load of nonsense. It doesn't make sense. So you know that they are sinners, and it's a man and a woman, and then you've just made them into gods and you're worshipping them. Where is the logic in this? Where is the logic in even the story? So they set off to perform the pilgrimage. Upon their arrival in Mecca, they entered the Kaaba, taking advantage of the absence of anybody else and of the privacy of the secret house. Isaf committed adultery with her in the sanctuary. Thereupon they were transformed into stone, becoming 2 misks. They were then taken out and placed in their respective places. Later on, the Uzzā and the Quraysh, as well as everyone who came on pilgrimage to the sacred house, worshipped them. Very strange story. The first amongst the children of Ismail and amongst other peoples besides to adopt such idols and give them individual names in accordance with the traditions which persisted concerning them when the people departed from the religion of Ismail were the Hudayl ibn Mudrik. This is Ibn Kalbi again, right? So we have to take these with a pinch of salt. The Kaaba of Najran. So there was another Kaaba also. There was the Kaaba of Najran. The Bani al-Harith ibn Ka'ab had in Najran a Kaaba which they venerated. It is the one which Al-Asha mentions in one of his odes. It has been claimed that it was not a Kaaba for worship, but merely a hall for those people whom the poet mentioned In my opinion, it is very likely the case, since I have not heard of the Banu al-Harith ever mentioning it in their poetry. The Liyyid had another Kaaba in Sindad, located in the region between Al-Kufa and Al-Basra. It is the one which Aswad ibn Ja'far mentions in one of his odes. So in the poetry this is mentioned. I have, however, heard that this house was not a place of worship, rather it was a celebrated edifice. Consequently, Aswad mentioned it. A certain man of the Juhayna named Abduddar ibn Khudayb once said to his people, "Come, let us build a house which with which we would rival the Kaaba, thereby attracting unto us many of the Arabs." Interesting, because we hear this story in the south with Abraha, and now we're hearing it with the Arabs. They deemed the suggestion very grave and refused to heed his behest. Thereupon he said, "I have wished that a house be raised free of iniquity and removed from sin, but those who, when called upon to face a crisis, steal away and tied in right outskirts of Kaldam, have demurred and refused my request. They clamor and cry and insist that no one should give them orders, and when entreated they turn away. Some withdraw like the mute and the dumb. They withhold their charity and conceal every insult among their kin, as the mark of the brand of the mule is hid." So the Arabs were scared to build anything that would rival the Kaaba. This is the reason why they took extreme offense to when Abraha said, "I'm building a church that's going to rival the Kaaba and deter them from their pilgrimage there." Had he not said that, there would have been another cathedral. So a quick recap. Where would you place Al-Lāt, Uzzā and Manāt? We would place them in the north, right? They came with the Arabs from the north. We haven't seen where yet, but we will look at where. So where is the origin of the Arabs? We know for sure from the last lesson, the second to last lesson, the origin of the language, that again the Arabs originated in the north. What proves do we have language? The gods, which we're going to look at, and the fact that the Hijazi Arabs have more in common with the Syrians and Jordanians than they do have with the Yemenites. If in the north, why? We just mentioned. If in the south, this is just for my students. Why do we insist on classical? Why do we insist on classical Arab scholarship? They don't even know the origin of their own pagan gods. So the Arabs, the pagan Arabs, don't even know the origin of their own gods. If you ask them where their gods came from, they won't know. The epigraphic records points to where they came from. If you ask them where they originated from, they will say the south. Again, what's their proof? Their claim? There is no concrete claim, yet the epigraphic record proves otherwise. So we need to, now that we have access to the epigraphic inscriptions, we need to use them. And some at the end of the day, a lot of Seerah is just akhbar. A lot of these things are just akhbar. They're just reports. They're not hadith. They're just reports. So they could be right, they could be wrong. And we use any source of evidence we can to see if it can bolster our argument or weaken our argument. Now let's have a look at the name Ar-Rahman. Ar-Rahman is a name that Allah uses for himself as one of his attributes, and it's similar to Ar-Rahim, Rahim and Rahman, but Rahim is merciful, Rahman is the most merciful, compassionate. This is a name Allah has reserved for the mu'mins, the believers. Allah is generally merciful, we can see that in creation, but He's exceptionally merciful to His believers, His mu'mins, Ar-Rahman. Now, Allah has referenced himself as such in the Quran, but the pagan Arabs, the Qurayshis, would deny that they understood this name. This was something that they understood. They knew very well who was being referenced, but they chose not to. So then Allah references what they're saying, and Allah says, when they are told, prostrate yourselves before the merciful one, Ar-Rahman, they say, what is the merciful one? Shall we prostrate ourselves before whomsoever you command us to prostrate? This even further increases their aversion. Now, this is interesting. Why am I mentioning this? Because even in the Jewish and Christian religion, this name was known. Let's have a look. So who is Rahman? The merciful. Rahmanan, Rahmanan. The epithet Rahmanan is constantly confirmed in inscriptions, particularly from the late Sabaean period, after 380. Remember, I said that around about this time, all other deities stopped being worshipped and only one God was worshipped. This could have been just naturally which way the Arabs flowed, or it could be Christian and Jewish influence on them that made them do this. Rahmanan, it's been attested after 380. It makes sense. Around about this time, the Jews were in Yemen and the Christians also. The oldest or first example we have of this word is an inscription written in Akkadian and Aramaic found in Tel Fakhira in Syria. So this is something that even in the Aramaic language and the Akkadian language, which are sister languages to Arabic and Hebrew, if you want to say it that way, this name Rahman, Ar-Rahman, is known to them. The inscription dedicated to the Aramean god Haddad, Lah Rahmanan Zi Tasloweth Tabh, merciful God to whom prayer is sweet. In the Akkadian version, Adad is called by the form Remanu, so it would probably be Rahmanu or Rahmanu. Rahmanu was also used as the epithet for the god Marduk. So this is an attribute that these people assigned to their god also. So this attribute was known. When you say Rahman, and especially when the Rasul is talking and teaching them, he's referencing Allah. They knew this. When Allah is revealing verses in the Quran, he's referencing himself. So this is a name that the pagans, the Meccans, refused to claim they didn't understand, but it was known across the vast area, very far back in prehistory, from the north up to Yemen in the south. And here we know that Rahmanan was known in the south because there were Christians and Jews in the south. In the south, all pagan inscriptions disappear after the second half of the 4th century. It was replaced by Lord of Heaven or Lord of Heaven and Earth, Rabbus Samawat wal Ard Rabbus Samawat. Right? Lord of the Heavens, Rabbus Samawi, as it's written over there. Is that in reference to Allah, or is that just a title they've given to a pagan deity? I don't know. And only one Lord is referenced, Rahmanan. It's mentioned by name. This is how it's written in the Musnad script. Now remember, I said that the definite article al doesn't exist in their language written al. It's written an, just the n, and it's at the back. So this would read Rahmanan. We would say in Arabic Ar-Rahman, they would say Rahmanan, and you can see it here. So you can just look at this, and because you know that an without the vowels would be written just the n, and Rahman would be written without the vowels, it would be an n. So you can see here the two ends. So from looking at the two ends, and you know that at the end of the word, it's very easy to know which way the writing flows. It's written from right to left. This is what's written on the record. Here are Jewish inscriptions. Rabbu would be Rahman, by the merciful Lord of the Jews. Rab Yahud. Here you can see that. Rab Yahud be Rahmanan, by the merciful Lord of the Jews. Then inscription 508, we have the word Rahman there is highlighted. And God, to whom belongs heaven and earth, shall protect our king and have mercy on all the words. O merciful, you are Lord. And then in 1, 2, 3, 4 places in inscription 520, for their Lord, the merciful master of heaven, so that he grant to him and his spouses and to his children, the merciful, to live a life of justice and to die a death of justice, and that the merciful grant to him children who are healthy, who will fight for the name of the merciful. So these are clearly written Jewish inscriptions. If you read the Himyaritic language here, you'd be able to read it. If you can read it, it doesn't sound very different from the Arabic. In recitation, it's very close actually. Like you can see there in line 5 in inscription 520, Rahmanan bil Samawi, is it? Let's have a look at what 5 line would be. The merciful master of heaven, there you go, Samawi, so that he grant to him and his spouses. So line 6, and to his children, Rahmanan, hey is to live. sidqun, of justice. And it's interesting. This is easily understood by native Arab speakers. If they were to look at this, they'd understand quite a lot of this. Then a Christian inscription. Inscription 506. This is Abraha's inscription, discovered at Muraygan. Inscription informs about Abraha's war campaign at Haluban in 662 of the Sabaean era, that is 552 AD. So 570, this is 20 years before, 18 years before Rasul's birth. He made a few campaigns, and the last of his campaigns was the one that he made to Mecca. He made many campaigns in the northerly direction, up towards the Hijaz, to Yathrib, and also to the Najd sides, to expand his domain. Here he's referenced Rahman 2 times, by the power of the Merciful One and his Messiah. So that's not, you can see here straight away, it's no longer Jewish, it's Christian. The king Abraha. So Abraha returned from Haliban by the power of the Merciful One. This is another inscription of his on the Ma'rib Dam. The famous Ma'rib Dam has an inscription, and the dam was built around 750 BC. The first construction is 1700 BC, very early date. Found as one of the engineering wonders of the ancient world, Abraha's inscription on Ma'rib Dam relates the quelling of a rebellion inspired by a son of the dethroned ruler Sumayya Aswa in the year 543. That's 657 of the Sabaean era. This text, also known as Ma'rib's inscription, gives us information about the dam's repairs, the meeting of the embassies from Abyssinia, Byzantium, Persia, Hira, Harith bin Jabalat, the Plakia of Arabia in the following. Wow, he met emissaries from all of the kingdoms up north. Inscription begins also with interesting sentence, by the power and favor of the Merciful and his Messiah and the Holy Spirit. You can see that there. The use of Ha-Rahman, the root here, and the Sabaean Rahmanan by Jews as a name for God was popular in the Talmudic period. In the Hebrew Bible appears the term Rahum, merciful, only in the function of the God's attribute. Ha-Rahman. So Ha would probably be the definite article here. Meanwhile, up north, what's happening up north? Let's have a look at some more gods from up north. Radu is a god that Al-Kalbi, Ibn Al-Kalbi references in Jummatul Jandal, if I'm not mistaken. Let's have a look. This god, he says that this is the seat of this god was worshipped here, but Ahmad Jalad says that when they dug up this site, they found only crosses. So far, it seems like that was a Christian site only and nothing else. Radu comes from the Arabic close cognate would be Rida, the pleasure of. So Radu was, the pleased God or whatever for them. This writing looks like Safietic. The translation by Jin, so Li Jin bin Jilham bin Siddi Harab bin Qutban Ha Jimel wa Hardu Galmat wa War. So by Jin, son of Jilham, son of Sadi, son of Harab, son of Qutban, this camel, Awradu, grant booty and obliterate, who damaged the text. So here it's using bin as opposed to bar. So this shows that it's a date quite close to like sometime in the 3rd, 4th century BC, AD. Here's another translation. Awradu helped the Banama son of Haris, son of Habat, and he awaited the horses of the horsemen. So that's Radu. Now, Isaf al-Na'ila, remember I mentioned this earlier. Ibn Kalbi, this is Abdul Mundir Hashim ibn Muhammad said, Al-Kalbi relates on the authority of As-Saleh, who in turn related on the authority of Ibn Abbas, that Asif al-Na'ila a man from the Jurham called Isif ibn Yahla and a woman called Na'ilah, the daughter of Zayd, another Jurhamite, were two lovers. Isaf was courting Na'ilah in the land of Yemen. They set out to perform the pilgrimage. Upon their arrival in Mecca, they entered the Kaaba, taking advantage of the absence of anyone else in the privacy. They basically committed adultery, as I said, and they were then taken out and placed in their respective places because God turned them into stone. Later on, the Uzzā and the Quraysh, as well as everyone who came in pilgrimage to the sacred house, worshipped them. There's problems with this story. The problem I have is, let's just take the last line here. Everybody who came afterwards worshipped them. So the original people who put those idols there, statues there before they became idols, didn't they tell everybody, what are you worshipping? And then they decide to get rid of them, thinking everybody's worshipping these. And why would you place idols, statues of people that have committed a huge enormity in the Kaaba as some sort of markers? Nothing about the story makes sense. It's not a story that I find credible by any means. So the first amongst the children of Ishmael to adopt such idols and gave them individual names in accordance with the tradition which persisted. So again, this story here, it's just a story, there's no evidence for it. There was even a talbiyah that Quraysh would recite directed at Isaf. We will look at the talbiyahs when we talk about the Mecca, inshallah. Now on to Al-Lāt, the infamous Al-Lāt. What do we know about her from the epigraphic record and other monuments? Where would you place Al-Lāt? By now, everybody should know we place Al-Lāt in the north. Why? Because we've given all the evidence. Ever wondered what her statue looked like? Her statue in Mecca and its environs and the pagan areas must have been simple affairs and were all destroyed. However, she was worshipped in the north, and the north, they were richer people, they could make better monuments, and they had statues. So did you ever wonder what she looked like? May give you an idea where she was from. If you see this picture, I'll give you an idea. This is Al-Lāt. This is the goddess Al-Lāt that was worshipped in the north as well as Arabia, in Central Arabia, in the Hijaz region. By looking at this picture, it'll give you the idea of the civilization that carved her. This looks Romanesque, Greek-esque. We know that the Romans were in the north, overlording it over the Arabs, and even the Arabs, the Palmyreans and the Nabateans, their architectural styles were similar to Roman styles because they had interacted with them for ages, a millennia. Goddess Al-Lāt with palm tree and lion relief from Baal Shamin temple, supplemented in Palmyrene script and language. There's a lion next to her. I've never worked out why there's always a lion next to her, but you can clearly see a lion next to her, and it figures in other things as well. This is another statue of Lāt. This is the goddess that's mentioned in the Quran. It's a statue from Hatra, and if we look here, we look at place names where places of worship of her were found. This is taken from the Journal of Ancient History and Archaeology, 2023. So in Palmyra, Tadmor, we see a place of worship. In Salkad, in Wadi Rum, in Hatra, Al-Ula, Taif, and Dura Europus. So what's the first thing that strikes you about this? Her seat of worship, her place of worship, all in the north. Remember now, we're joining the links. Arabs didn't come from the south, they came from the north. What's the evidence? Language, gods, culture. So these gods predated the Arabs adopting them and worshipping them in the peninsula. They originally came from the north, and these are the areas they were worshipped. The goddess Al-Lāt's name is recorded as Han Al-Lāt in Aramaic. Han would be the definite article. Remember we said Han, Ha, A, An, Al, La, all definite articles used in various Semitic languages. So Han Al-Lāt in Imperial Aramaic. Al-Lāt in Nabatean Arabic. On the left hand side you can see the writing as well. Al-Lāt in Palmyrene, Lat, Hallat, Hallat. In Safavitic, Ha would be the definite article. In Didantic, Lat, Thamudic, Lat. In ancient Greek, Alilat, Al-Ilat. So the this is the feminine form of Al-Ilah, even though we say that you cannot make feminine forms, but if you do, this is what you get. So Al-Ilah was the way that the Christians would refer to God. Al-Ilah, Allah in Aramaic. Al-Ilah, Allah. Al-Ilat is what the Greeks did here for Lat. Then we have Lat, Latan in Sabayan. So in Sabayan we have Lat'an. The an is the definite article, so it would be Lat'an. Al-Lat in classical Arabic. This is the temple of Al-Lāt in Syria. Now this temple is a grand affair. The temple in Taif was probably no way like this. It was probably a very simple affair and a small affair. Obviously this is from a well-established civilization, and this is a genuine temple of Al-Lāt. This was dedicated by the citizen Tamirosa of Palmyra in 163-164 AD. This is the temple of Baal Shamin, and I think Lat was worshipped inside here. This is in Syria. This is it from inside. And this is what ISIS did when they blew it up. And it's interesting because whenever I'm teaching history, and even when you're teaching history of, like in the Nawawi course, you're teaching the history of Imam Nawawi. You show the grave, ISIS blew it up. You show monuments from Iraq, ISIS blew them up. You show monuments from Syria, ISIS blew them up. They destroyed, not only did they destroy humans, they destroyed the dead and they destroyed monuments. These monuments are valuable to us to know things about our history and our past. The Sahaba went past these areas and didn't touch these. Are these people better than the Sahaba? But then again, these people have bad words to say about the Sahaba as well. You know, their way or no way. That's it. This is the line of Al-Lāt. This was, I think, found. They've been working on fixing it since 1974, bits of it, and then it fell to bits again, and then they just patched it up again. This is what's left now. After the destruction, this is what's left there now. You can see there's a plaque on one of the pillars on the right-hand side, probably from the tourist board of Syria. This is the temple. This is the goddess Al-Lāt. They believed in no other gods except Dionysus and the heavenly Aphrodite. Aphrodite here for them, this is in history's thingy speaking. Aphrodite is what they recognize Al-Lāt to be, basically. They believe in no other gods except Dionysus and the heavenly Aphrodite. And they say that they wear their hair as Dionysus does. He's cutting it around the head and shaving the temples. They call Dionysus Oracles and Aphrodite Al-Ilat. Dionysus sounds like the Roman or Greek rendition of Dashura, which, yes, in the pantheon of especially in the Nabatean realm, there was a link between Dashura. Sometimes she was the consort of Dashura. This is Al-Lāt, Athena. Okay, so they even call her Athena. Athena found in the temple of Al-Lāt, Palmyra, in the Palmyra Museum. The ISIS killed the 80-year-old curator of the museum in Palmyra. He managed to hide all of the works of art and everything to preserve them. He stayed behind. He was a wanted man. He stayed behind. They killed him, and the statue, they damaged these statues as well. So 44% of the Safiatic inscriptions are related to Al-Lāt. So 44% of Safiatic inscriptions we found are related to Al-Lāt. Safiatic was from the north, we know this, so Al-Lāt worshipped in the north. The language originated in the north, Al-Lāt originated in the north. And for 44% of all inscriptions to be referencing this one deity, it shows you just how popular this deity was in the north. The Nabateans regarded Al-Lāt as the mother of the deities, and her family relations vary. Sometimes she is regarded as the consort of Dashura, and at other times as the mother of Dashura. Nabatean inscriptions call her and Al-Uzzā the brides of Dashura. So it's an interesting mix here. Sometimes she's this relation and sometimes she's this relation. What's interesting is that even though she is seen as the bride of Dashura or the mother of Dashura, Dashura is never referenced in the south. The Arabian, the Qurayshis, let's just narrow it down to the Qurayshis, adopted Al-Lāt, Uzzā, Manāt, and Hubal, all from the north. But they, for some reason, didn't adopt Dashura. Or at least we don't have any major reference to Dashura in Mecca or in any of the works. She was worshipped over a vast area covering North Arabia and the Levant. Al-Lāt, a bas-relief. This is a bas-relief from the 2nd century CE in Iran. In Salkhad, this is one of the other locations we showed you in the map. Salkhad lies 20 kilometers from Bosra, and the inscription found is as follows. So Bosra is on the stop to when you're traveling up towards Syria on the trade routes, and this is where Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and or Umar, when they went there, they would discharge their goods and come back. Abu Talib also. So very close to this area. The monk was in this area. Let's see if we can read this now. Dana Bait is house. Zu Banaha. They, would that be one of Rahu Bar Malku? So that would be son of Malik, son of Kalbu, son of Ruhu, Al-Lāt, Al-Hatam. So you can see there the last name on the right hand side on the first line is Al-Lāt. The Wadi Nasab Rahu Bar Kusayu Rahu Danu D. And again Lat, if I'm not mistaken. No, that's not Lat, that's just L. Vera bi Sant Sar. Okay, let's just carry on. This is the temple which was built by Ruhu, son of Mulku, son of Kalbu, got that bit right, son of Ruhu, for Al-Lāt, their goddess, who is at Salkat, and which was founded by Ruhu, son of Usew, great-grandfather of this Rahu mentioned above, in the month of Ab, in the 17th year of Malichus, king of the Nabateans, son of Aretas, king of the Nabateans, who loves his people. Malichus and Aretas are Roman renditions of the original Arabic names of this king. Here is Al-Lāt, meaning, what does Al-Lāt mean? Now, this is probably an approximation. I took this from somewhere. I don't really trust the source, as in I couldn't get verification. I tried to find out what Lāt, Uzzā, Manāt meant, but I couldn't really come across something concrete. This is something I came across. The name Al-Lāt is believed to be derived from the Arab root lawata, which relates to the idea of worship or veneration. Lahu. No. The female rendition of the male deity name Al-Lāt was often considered a goddess of fertility and was associated with earth life and maternal aspects. I believe this could change depending on which area of the peninsula she was worshipped. She was regarded as one of the chief goddesses of pre-Islamic Arabs. Temples dedicated to her were prominent in places like Taif. We know her seat was at Taif and it was destroyed, where she was honored with rituals and sacrifices. Al-Lāt in Petra. This is Dashura, by the way. The city of Petra has its own triad formed first by the supreme god Dashura among the Nabateans, the Sares in Greek, Dhu Sar. So Dhu is Dhu Shara, right, which is he of the mountain, god of the Mount Shara. And the two deities associated with him, Al-Lāt, the warrior goddess, Arab form of Athena. See again, look, they've joined them. Arab form of Athena. It's not the Arab form of Athena, it's a different goddess. And the celestial deity of Al-Uzzā, whose main temple located in the temple of the winged lions, he is associated to Al-Uzzā as his consort. These relationships change. A stele from the town carries a dedication to Lāt, that litter, Al-Lāt, the lady of the palace. Nearly half a century after the temple was built, another inscription shows that it was repaired by the same family. This time the builder is a certain Wathalu, son of Qusay, son of Dad, son of Witr, son of Kalbu, son of too many sons here. And the Kalbu is the same as in the inscription quoted above before, right? So by now the temple is built for Al-Lāt and her Wigr, and not just the goddess. The nature of Wigr is unclear. So it's one family, they probably wealthy family, and then half a generation later, 50 years later, half a century later, they're repairing it, and this time they're adding an additional entry which we are unclear of. Ibn al-Kalbi, we have to look at Ibn al-Kalbi, see what he has to say about Al-Lāt. We've seen the inscriptions, we've seen the record, we've seen her face, we've seen some temples. Now Ibn al-Kalbi. They adopted Al-Lāt as their goddess. Al-Lāt stood in Taif and was more recent than Manāt. So this is his understanding, right? We've seen Al-Lāt is over 2,000 years ago, very ancient. She was a cubic rock besides which a certain Jew used to prepare his barley porridge. Her custody was in the hands of the Banu Attab ibn Malik of the Thaqif. So the Banu Thaqifi were the custodians of Al-Lāt's seat in Ta'if, who had built an edifice over her. The Quraysh, as well as all the Arabs, were wont to venerate Al-Lāt. They also used to name their children after her, calling them Zayd Al-Lāt or Taym Al-Lāt. She stood in the palace of the left-hand side minaret of the present-day mosque of At-Ta'if. You can see this mosque and you can see the minaret and you know exactly where she stood. I don't have a picture. She is the idol which God mentioned when he said, "Have you not seen Al-Lāt and Al-Uzzā?" It was this same Al-Lāt which Amr ibn al-Ju'ayd had in mind when he said, "In forswearing wine I am like him who had abjured Al-Lāt, although he had been at one time her devotee." Likewise, it was the same idol in which Al-Mutalammis alluded in his satire of Amr ibn al-Mudhir, when he said, "Thou hast banished me for fear of lampoon and satire. No, by Allah and all the sacred battles, thou shalt not escape." Battle is also mentioned here in the poetry. Bear this name in mind. I'll show you what a battle is further on. Allah continued to be venerated until the Thaqif embraced Islam. When the Apostle of God dispatched Al-Mughira ibn Shubab, who destroyed her and burnt her temple to the ground. In this connection, when Al-Lāt was destroyed and burnt to the ground, Shadid ibn Arid al-Jushami said, warning the Thaqif not to return to her worship nor attempt to avenge her destruction. "Come not to Al-Lāt, for God has doomed her to destruction. How can you stand by one which doth not triumph? Verily that which when set on fire resisted not the flames, nor saved her stones, is inglorious and worthless. Hence when the Apostle in your place shall arrive and then leave, no one of her votaries shall be left." As ibn Hajar, swearing by Allah, said, "By Allah and Al-Uzzā and those who in them believe, and by Allah, verily he is greater than both." Here's an inscription here from the temple of Al-Lāt in Wadi Rum. This is another inscription. It says, "Li Gaut bin Sal bin Tak ma something wa Bani Beit Lāt, house of Lāt, Dilla'ad." So you see that name there, Ad, right? So it's signed off. It's signed off by someone of the people of Ad, worshipping who? A idol, a goddess known as Al-Lāt. There's your evidence of the Ad being in the north as well. Al-Uzzā. These three idols on the right hand side are Lat, Manāt and Al-Uzzā. This inscription is from Timna in Wadi Araba, written in the Proto-Sinaitic script. This is the inscription below. This is what Wadi Tinha looks like. It's a very old inscription. This says, "Zu Ramu Sekil Ha Az-Zamam," the scribe, right? The theophoric element za, Uzzā. So there wouldn't be no U and an A and a Z in the middle, because it would have been just consonants, so you'd only see her name as za. When you see za written in inscriptions, that's Uzzā, Al-Uzzā. Or it'll probably be La za, or za on its own. The theophoric element za indicates that the deity Uzzā was already venerated in the late Bronze Age. Late Bronze Age is a very early date. Al-Uzzā, meaning the name Uzzā, comes from the Arabic word Azaza, meaning Azaz, meaning power or might. Aziz is someone who is great. Thus, Al-Uzzā was often referred to as the mighty one or the powerful. Al-Uzzā was a goddess associated with strength, protection, and victory. She was one of the most revered deities of the Quraysh tribe in Mecca. Al-Uzzā was often depicted as a symbol of power and authority, and her shrine was located near the sacred city of Mecca. This is an idol of Al-Uzzā from a temple in Nabatea, and there are some inscriptions on the bottom there as well. This is Al-Uzzā again. Al-Uzzā would have been in this rock face here, in that niche, and on the right hand side, on the left hand side also. Looks like there's some writing up on the wall there. Al-Uzzā, on your right hand side here is a stone carved Al-Uzzā, and these Nabatean earrings standing in the middle is thought to be Al-Uzzā also. Al-Uzzā, the name means the powerful. Yep, we did this. These earrings are decorated with 2 eyes and a nose representing the Nabatean goddess Al-Uzzā, the equivalent of Venus. Again, look, they've joined the goddess, equivalent of Venus. I wouldn't even say that. It's a different goddess and there's no similarities. Just a few similarities when you say the equivalent. It's like saying you have a car that's a Ferrari and a car that's a Range Rover, and you say both of them are the same. Why? Because, oh yeah, both have engines and both have wheels. Yes, they do, but both wheels and engines serve a completely different purpose, and the rest of the car is different. Here is a carving here. This is from the Israeli Museum in Jerusalem, and there's an Iron Age pottery shard, possibly 7th century, mentioning Uzzā. Al-Kalbi on Al-Uzzā. What does Al-Kalbi say? According to Al-Kalbi, Al-Uzzā is more recent than Al-Lāt and Manāt. How did he manage to understand this? We've seen Al-Uzzā going back 2,500 years, and we've seen Al-Lāt, and we've seen Al-Uzzā going back to the Bronze Age, which is even further back in time. So Al-Kalbi needs to give us the source of his information and understanding, which he sadly didn't do. He gives theophoric names such as the Thalaba ibn Uqba named his son after Al-Lāt, calling him Taym Al-Lāt, Taym Allah, Zaid Al-Lāt ibn Rufayda. Sometimes what he does is he ends up putting information from one place in another place, so this is just be copied and pasted. But we look at the second paragraph. The person who introduced Al-Uzzā was Zilam ibn Asad. Her idol was situated in a valley in Nakhlat ash-Shaymiyya called Hurad, alongside Al-Ghumayyah, to the right of the road from Mecca to Al-Iraq above Al-Lāt, and 9 miles from Al-Bustim. Over her built a house called Bus, in which the people used to receive oracle communications. Oracular communications is like messages from the unseen, right? Just like the Orif or the Delphi in Greece. All of these religions, they would go to their deities and they would have somebody like a soothsayer or somebody there who would be the interpreter. He'd go into a trance state and say that this came from the goddess, and then give you the interpretation of whatever it was you were seeking to know. The Arabs as well as the Quraysh were wont to name their children Abdul Uzzā. Furthermore, Al-Uzzā was the greatest idol amongst the Quraysh. They used to journey to her, offer gifts unto her, and seek her favors through sacrifice. The Quraysh were wont to circumambulate the Kaaba and say, by Al-Lāt and Al-Uzzā and Manāt, the third idol besides. Verily, they are the most exalted females whose intercession is to be sought. A recently found late Bronze Age inscription from Timna in Wadi Araba, written in the Proto-Sinaitic script, revealed a small piece of evidence for prehistory of the deity Al-Uzzā. This is the same thing now. The inscription was written by two ovals and reads Ra Za Ram Li Sakal, interpreted as, right, yeah, we've been through this before. Have you seen, and this is a Quranic ayah, the Quran references, have you seen Al-Lāt and Al-Uzzā and Manāt, the third idol besides? What? Shall ye have male progeny and God female? This indeed were an unfair partition. These are mere names, ye and your fathers named them. Thus God hath not sent down any warranty in this regard. Let's go backwards to make sense of this. Whatever you're doing is nonsense. These are mere names. Allah says these are mere names. It's just names that you have made up. And if you go back, when Allah says, what? The Arabs were proud of having male offspring. Some tribes would kill their daughters. The poor, some of them would kill their daughters. We know this. The Arabs were proud of having male offspring, right? His face darkens when he has a female, as the Quran references. And then when it comes to males, they will celebrate, right? But they attribute daughters to Allah. So they say Al-Lāt, Manāt and Uzzā are daughters of Allah. So you're attributing sons to yourself, and for Allah you're giving daughters, when in your culture daughters are frowned upon. Right? So that's when Allah is saying, what? Like, are you for real? Do you even think what you're doing? And anyway, even if you did that, it's just mere names at the end of the day. What you're talking about is mere names. It holds no relevance, whatever you say or do. There are no gods. It's just me. Sacrifice. Somebody was married to the jawbone of a little cow, which one of the Banu Ghanam had offered for sacrifice. As he led it to the Gubayba of Al-Uzzā, he noticed some defects in its eyes, and when the cow was offered upon the altar and its flesh divided, his portion was foul. It was customary to divide the flesh of the sacrifice amongst those who had offered it and amongst those present at the ceremony. Khalid ibn Walid destroyed the temple at the behest of the Rasul. Khalid destroyed the first one, returning to the Prophet to report. Muhammad replied, asking whether something eventful happened, which Khalid denied. The same thing happened after cutting down the second tree. When Khalid was about to destroy the last tree, a woman with wild hair appeared, who is called Al-Uzzā by As-Sulaymi, the custodian of Al-Uzzā, and ordered to kill Khalid. Khalid struck the woman down with his sword and chopped her head off, at which she fell down in a pile of ashes. Khalid went on to kill Sulaymi and cut the last tree. When he returned to Muhammad, Muhammad is supposed to have said that the woman was Al-Uzzā and she shall never be worshipped again. So this is a jinn that was masquerading as Al-Uzzā. So when the oracle, they do the oracular stuff, she would probably speak, and all that sort of stuff that they would do, this jinni would speak. And it was the jinni that they needed to really kill, which they did do. Manāt. We have little information regarding Manāt. It is seemingly the name of one of the oldest deities in the Semitic pantheon, being already attested during the pre-Sargonic period. That's a very, very old date. In the form of Menutum, and is also one of the names of Ishtar. So this is the French here. It is thus found in an Aramaic inscription of Taimar dating the 4th, 3rd centuries BC, where it is invoked as Manwah. Al-Lāt, Manawat, goddess of the goddesses. Right, so Lat is goddess of the goddesses. In the Idumean Ostraka of an economic nature dating from the same period, published by Andrew, one notes 2 theophoric anthrophonemes containing the theoneme Manāt, Zed-Manāt, and Badmant. Abdu-Manāt in an inscription on a jar. These anthrophonemes, in particular theophonemes, testify to the variety of the population of the Edomite or Idumean Jewish Phoenicia. Of Arab origin, the name of Manāt appears in Nabatean in the form Manwatu. How can she be of Arab origin when she was the pre-Sargonian? Assyrians knew about her. In the form of Manatwu to Muda'in Saleh, the goddess is quoted there with her qais, that is to say her measure, alongside the Ashura and Lat on a large funerary inscription. In the theophoric anthroponym of an inscription from Transjordan, we read Wabanatu. The theophoric name Qais Manāt is attested in the South Arabian inscriptions from Qaryat al-Faw, that's very far south. Qaryat al-Faw is sat next to Rabbul Khali. Today I think it's been encompassed by the empty quarter. It was a trading post. From there the trade went up northwest towards the Iraq and the Persian lands. I showcased Qaryat al-Faw in one of the earliest lectures. It also appears in Thamodian, where it has the defective form Manat. It is also known in the Palmyrines and Dacia, the present-day Romania, where Latin inscriptions emanating from the Palmyrine found at place so-and-so mentions that his name is transcribed in Latin. Okay, the variants in spelling by the name of the goddess and Arabic spelling have received several interpretations. The role of Manāt as goddess of destiny and therefore of the passage of time, as well as its assimilation with Tycha, goddess of fortune, can explain the presence of a bust of Tycha in the center of the zodiac of the Nabatean temple of Kirbat at Tanur. A bit more information on Manāt. The name Manāt comes from the Arabic word manaya, which conveys meanings relating to destiny, fate, or portion. Al-Manāt was thus known as the goddess of fate and destiny, embodying the idea of predetermination and allotment of life's outcomes. Al-Manāt was one of the most revered deities in pre-Islamic Arabia, worshipped alongside Lāt and Uzzā as one of the daughters of Allah in the pagan Arab pantheon. She held a prominent position in the belief system of the time and was associated with the following. Al-Manāt was regarded as the deity overseeing fate, life and death. People sought her blessings to determine their future, especially in times of uncertainty or before significant events like journeys, battles, and marriages. Her name reflects the unknown and the forces shaping individual destinies. Her primary shrine was located near Qudayd between Mecca and Medina, a coastal area in the western part of Arabia. Pilgrims traveling to Mecca often stopped to offer sacrifices to her as part of their rituals. Devotees made offerings and sacrifices at her shrine to seek her favor and guidance in matters of faith. This included both animal sacrifices and other forms of devotion. Al-Manāt is explicitly mentioned in the Quran in Surah Najm as one of the idols worshipped by the Quraysh. And have you seen Manāt the third, as Allah says? The verse refutes the idea that these goddesses had any divine power or relationship to Allah, highlighting the futility of idol worship. The most ancient of all these idols was Manāt. The Arabs used to name their children. This is Ibn al-Kalbi saying, Abdul Manā. I think we've read this. I think there's additional information in there. So when they would do their pilgrimage, they wouldn't see their pilgrimage complete until they had visited her shrine. We want to go on pilgrimage, observe the vigil at all the appointed places, but not shave their heads. At the end of the pilgrimage, however, when they were about to return home, they would set out to the place where Manāt stood and shave their heads and stay there a while. They did not consider their pilgrimage completed until they visited Manāt. Because of this veneration of Manāt by the Aus and the Khazraj, Abdul Uzzā bin Wadi al-Muzani or some other Arab said, "An oath truthful and just I swore by Manāt at the sacred place of the Khazraj." The Aus and the Khazraj used to worship her. And all of the Arabs did, but especially the Aus and the Khazraj, as well as the inhabitants of Medina and Mecca and their vicinities. They used to sacrifice before her and bring unto her their offerings. The children of Ma'ad were followers of a faith which still preserved a little of the religion of Ismail. The Rabia and the mother too were followers of a similar faith, but none venerated her more than the Aus and the Khazraj. Her shrine was on the Red Sea coast between Mecca and Medina. The Quraysh, as well as the rest of the Arabs, continued to venerate Manāt until the Apostle of God set out from Medina in the 8th year of the Hijrah, the year in which God accorded him the victory. When he was at a distance of 4 or 5 nights from Medina, he dispatched Ali to destroy her. Ali demolished her, taking away all her treasures and carried them back to the Prophet. Among the treasures which Ali carried away were 2 swords which had been presented to Manāt by Al-Harith ibn Abi Shamir al-Ghassani, the king of the Ghassanids. The one sword was called Mikhdam and the other Rasub. They are the 2 swords of Al-Harith which Alqama mentions in one of his poems. He said, wearing 2 coats of mail as well as 2 studded swords, Mikhdam and Rasub, the Prophet gave these 2 swords to Ali. It is therefore said that Dhul Fiqr, the sword of Ali, was one of them. So it's interesting, the sword of Ali, the famous 2-pronged sword of Ali, came from the temple of Manāt, and the sword belonged to a Ghassanid prince. It is also said Ali found these 2 swords in the temple of Al-Fals, the idol. Sa'ad ibn Zayd al-Shahli was sent with 20 horsemen to Al-Mashalal to destroy an idol called Manāt, worshipped by the polytheist Al-Aus and Khazraj tribe of Mecca. Here also a black woman appeared naked with disheveled hair, wailing and beating on her chest. Sa'ad immediately killed her, destroying the idol and broke the casket. So you're going to think, oh, why did he kill a woman? She wasn't doing anything. That's because it wasn't a woman, it was a jinni that was the muse behind the idol. Manāt comes from the root mana, to mete out or to determine, or it comes from manaya, meaning fate, or she is known as the goddess of fate, destiny and fortune. Banat el, so this is not to be confused with the daughters of God. We mentioned these earlier on in the south. Banat el, according to Christian rabbin, the 3 principal goddesses of pre-Islamic lands, Lāt, Uzzā, Manāt, were worshipped in Yemen, Syria and... Okay, so this is Banat el, as in the daughters of God, not the ones from the south. Yes, the 3 principal deities, Lāt, Manāt and Uzzā, were worshipped in Yemen, Syria and Western Arabia, the Hijaz area, and they were known as daughters of God. Banat el and variants, daughters of God. Banat el. Banat Allah. In the temple of As-Sauda site, the ancient Nashashan, a representation of the god Ariyada was found on 2 pillars. Now in a lower register of these pillars is a procession of 4 young women similar to each other, waving. So okay, so this is what I was talking about. This is what I was originally saying. These are also described as daughters of God. There are 4 statues of 4 women, but these we don't think are these statues here. We think they're inferior deities, just like in the south there were daughters of El that pregnant women would worship or something, and they were seen as lesser things. Their role is perhaps that of intermediaries and messengers. So this is some references if you want to read more information about Nabatean religion and the deities and the religious rites of pre-Islamic Arabia. Okay, another deity that's mentioned is Baal. Baal. It may derive from the Canaanite pantheon. It may derive from the Aramaic word Hubal, meaning he is Baal. The definite article, if we assume at some point, was Ha, and Baal Bel. Hubal. You see that there? The linkage there? Or if we use the Aramaic, which is Hubel. He is Bel. He is Baal. Hubal. So Hubel or Hubal is, I don't know why I'm saying Hubal. Hubal is how the Arabs know it, right? Where was this God from? The north. As I said to you, all their gods were from the north. They have a relationship with the north. It's their ancestral homeland. A likely candidate would be Baal. The idea is one of vapor, ethereal, or spirit of the air. It was the chief god of the Quraysh of Mecca. It was the god of Mecca. God of fertility, rain, and war. The idol had a severed hand. So I tried to look up evidence to find if statues of Baal had severed hands, and no, they didn't. But I did come across one reference somewhere. I couldn't locate it again. I don't know where it is. I didn't see it again, but it mentioned a broken hand. Anyway, further research needs to be done here. And Hubal had a hand missing. It is related in Sahih al-Bukhari on the authority of Abu Huraira that Rasulullah said, I saw Amr ibn is it Amir al-Khuzai dragging his intestines in the fire. He was the first one to release animals for the idols. Another hadith, I saw hell destroying itself and I saw Amr drag his intestines and he was the first one to release animals. It's very interesting. Remember this hadith. The Seerah mentions again and again that Rasulullah said that he saw this man dragging his intestines because he was the first to bring an idol, that everybody started worshipping. The authentic ahadith mention that he saw him dragging his intestines. That part is correct because he was the first one to release animals for the idols. Some sort of offerings or some sort of ritual. He was the first one to do this ritual, which makes sense. One of the chiefs of Mecca, when he does something, everybody does it. But to say that we know the first person to bring a deity and everybody started worshipping it, and the story that they give you is what? It's very funny how they even narrate this story. This is what I'm saying, critical engagement with the texts, people. Sometimes you don't need evidence, you need to use logic. This wise chief, as they call him, goes up to the north and he sees the people of the north, Syria, Jordan, worshipping idols. So he says, oh, what are you doing? This is exactly how they narrate it. What are you doing? We worship this idol, it gives us rain, it gives us this, it gives us that. Oh, we could do with that. I will take this idol back and put it in Mecca and my people will worship it. And that's exactly what happened according to the story. Now here's the first problem. He's your wise chief. He already knew the northerners worshipped idols. And if he is a monotheist, they believed in Allah at this point, why would he then think, wow, this idol gives? Right, I will take this idol back as well now and plant this idol. So he did that. I mean, if he's a monotheist, he wouldn't have done this. And the people would have rejected that if they were monotheists as well. Nobody collectively would allow an idol to be placed there. And he, as a king or as a chief, tribal chief, would lose his authority if he did something like that. So to turn around and say he saw them and he did this, it's a stretch. The only actual evidence we have is this one here. Hafidh ibn Hajar, he mentions this story, right? He's the first, Al-Fakhi, he narrated on the authority of Al-Kalbi that he said, Amr ibn Rabi'ah had a companion amongst the jinn. The jinn once said to him, rise Abu Thamama and go to the coast of Jeddah where you will find idols, bring them to Tihama and fear none and invite the Arabs to worship them and they will obey you. Amr ibn Luhay went to the coast of Jeddah and found the idols Wad, Sawa, Yaghuth, Ya'uq and Nasr buried there. These idols were worshipped during the lifetime of Prophet Noah and Idris. Enoch, that's according to the Table of Nations, that's one after Adam alayhi salam. So how far back in antiquity was that? And were carried by the flood there and sand buried them. Amr ibn Luhay excavated the idols and took them to Tihama during the Hajj season when tribes from all around Arabia conveyed in Mecca to perform Hajj. He invited the Arabs to worship them and they welcomed his invitation. Amr ibn Rabi was also known as Amr ibn Luhay. Just want to check something here. Right. So this guy was the first guy, Amr ibn Luhay was the first guy that supposedly got a premonition from a jinn. A jinn spoke to him, a jinni, and said, go to Jeddah, the coast, here is the spot, X marks the spot, dig, my friend, and you shall find. Find what? 5 idols that had been worshipped before Abraham. So thousands of years ago, in the time of Noah. Way up in the north, the northern fringes of Mesopotamia, that's bordering Turkey almost. And like Iraq, Iran, Turkey, that area. Syria, the top tip. And so, number one, if you believe that the flood was universal, everything was destroyed. Everything was destroyed. These idols miraculously escaped and were found thousands of miles away, buried in the sand, thousands of years or 1,000 years later by this gentleman here. Right? That doesn't make sense. If you believe the flood was local, which I do, and there's evidence to prove both ways, then these idols would not have ended up carried by the flood to this place anyway, right? And let's say the flood was universal and they were carried. Are you telling me stone-carved, weak idols carried from thousands of miles away, banging into other rock along the journey, into mountains, into valleys, into trees, into other rocks, would retain their shape as idols? Wouldn't they be fragmented? Or even at the very least, they remained in their initial shape? Wouldn't it have been like a pebble now? So many red flags about this story. There's no evidence being given, and I don't buy this story. Those particular 5 gods, yes, Al-Kalbi mentions 3 of them, and they are attested to be worshipped in the south. The Quran attests it. That's our biggest attestation. What's so amazing about this story is these gods are so ancient, yet they were worshipped in the south as well. Where did they come from? In the north again. Once again, they came from the north. The Prophet Nuh, Ad, and Thamud mentioned together in the Quran, all from the north. So be careful when you read stories like this. Deeper seerah, critical examination of source material and logical reasoning and comparing evidences and then marrying them all together. One of the guys in Ibn al-Kalbi was quoted as singing some poetry, some verse, and mentioned a Betel. What's a Betel? Betel basically is Beit El, house of God, Beit El. Just like we have Babylon, Bab El, Arabic Bab El, God, and in the Semitic languages, Bab, door, gate, right? Beit El is the house of God. Al-Kaaba is Baytullah, Beit El, if you want to call it that in the other languages. Baytullah. What is a Beit El? A Beit El is a representation of a deity, but not in a statue form, but rather a form of a stone. Right? This niche here would have held that stone. This is from Jordan. The Nabateans used 2 main types of stelae, the Beit El, meaning the representation of a deity, and the Nefesh, a memorial mark for the dead. They were meteorites that were venerated. So some say they were meteorites. right? So these were meteorites that fell down, and because they look different, they were venerated. Beth El is also a town in Israel mentioned in Genesis. If we look at that now, Jacob's dream at Beth El. Jacob left Beersheba and set out to Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw the stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching the heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are laying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Beit El, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's homeland, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me I will give you a tenth. Right, so the first part of the story seems quite beautiful. He has a dream connecting earth to heaven through a stairway into heaven, and God promises him good things and everything, right? I mean, that sounds very nice. But in the second part, what he does, he pours oil over it, and then he makes a condition: if God gives me this, then I shall do this. That becomes problematic. Is that translation gone wrong, or is that just complete wrong text? God knows best. But the top part's fine, the bottom part is problematic. The oldest Aramaic stelae are from the 8th century BCE. On this stele, treaties of the kings of KTB and Arpad in northern Syria are written. To remove the inscription, again, see that the curses. To remove the inscription from the Beit El, where they should remain unengraved. Nabatean inscriptions include two terms for Beit El, Nasab and Masab. Both terms are related to the Semitic root Yasab and describe an erected standing stone stele. There's words here that also have a similar meaning in the Quran, but I'm not confident to talk about it, so I won't talk about it. But Nasab and Masab is something interesting if you look at these words in the Arabic language. The Emesa temple to the sun god Elegabalos, with the betel at its center. This is the rock symbolizing the deity in a rough kind of hewed form. This is on a 3rd century AD coin. This is Jabal al-Khubta in Jordan. If you look down, you can see the carvings, the rock carvings of the Nabateans. Some of them look like the Khazaneh, the treasury, in small form. The famous one in Petra that everybody knows, that main picture. At the northwestern stepped path, there's a stepped path there, Jabal al-Qutba, the representation of the deities of a niche is explained by a votive inscription on the face of the rock. Lah Nasab al-Uzzā, is that Uzzā? Watar Beit and then Beit Dhu Beit Wahab Eli Sir Bar Zaidan. The translation would be, these are the Baitels of Al-Uzzā, okay, I got that bit right, and the Lord of the House, made by Wahabillahi. Okay, you can see that now in the ancient language as well. The caravan leader, son of Zaidan. So the caravan leader made these, and he left an inscription. And on that path, you can see a few of these. Al-Uzzā was the deity at Petra, and the Lord of the House is considered the Ashura. This is one of those niches, and there is a statue there. I don't know if that's a deity or somebody else. Here, Petra, another Nabatean eye. This design is famous for the Nabateans. Betel of the Syrian goddess Astargates. Astargates is the Roman or Greek rendition. It would have been another Aramaic or Semitic sounding name, identified by a Nabatean inscription. There's not a name author. Okay, there's something here about her. So on the right hand side, inscription number 16 from Wadi Rum, on the right of the niche of Al-Lāt from Basra, is read by Starsky as Nisbet Lat Ilahat, goddess of goddesses, right? So the Betel of Al-Lāt, the goddess. Oh, okay, my bad. Al-Lāt, which is the goddess. Al-Lāt, the goddess. Okay, Al-Lāt, see, I'm using that name Al-Lāt as the attribute. Al-Lāt, the goddess. Al-Lāt, Al-Lāt. Inscription number 2 on the left of the niche describes the Betel of the niche as the Lat. Al-Lāt. This is Al-Lāt, the goddess who is in Basra. This relief of Al-Lāt has attracted different interpretations. This is something else that they found in Basra. In Petra here they found niches, and in these niches would be the Beit Els. This is a Matab. A Matab is a standing structure, a standing base platform upon which idols would stand. Here in this picture, I think it's to do with representations of the dead. Let's have a look. The Aramaic word Maitab or Matab is related to the Semitic root Yatab, Yataba, Wataba, respectively, which means to sit. The Matab is the seat throne of the deity. It can be attributed to deity as a symbol of status. Possibly we have 2 Nabatean illustrations of a divine throne. A large throne is shaped in a goative niche at the base of Jabal al-Khutbah, and another very large throne is found in the rock-cut cave at As-Sela. Many Beitels sit upon some sort of support, which is often called a Matab. So these Matabs, you can imagine around the Kaaba, there were also Matabs like this where the idols would sit upon. They wouldn't just have them on the sand. Even if it was, they could sit straight. They'd probably have them on some sort of platform, which would add to the bulk of the area, which suggests that because the precinct isn't very large, and if there were 360 idols, they must have been human height or half human height. Some of them maybe just slightly larger, or maybe the very large ones were in their own seats in various cities. And then there were probably smaller ones inside the Kaaba as well, making up 360 odd idols around that place. This is in the Sikh of Petra. This is that walkway. This niche presents 3 Betels side by side underneath an arc supporting by pilasters. Its surface pattern of chisel marks indicates that the niche was abandoned before completion. Here's another one. Here are some more. And this is a meteorite called a Betel of Aphrodite in a temple in Cyprus. In Wadi Rum, we have Al-Lāt, the name in the description there. So now we know that the Arabs worship Lat, Manāt, and Uzzā, as well as a host of other deities. The most important ones for us were Lat, Manāt, Uzzā, and Hubal. We've identified them. We know more about them now. We know where they were originally seated in the peninsula and in the north, and we know that they came from the north. Excellent. What else did the pagan Arabs worship? It'll surprise you. Let's have a look. They worshipped jinns. Yes, you heard that right. They worshipped jinns. The Quran says, they will say, exalted are you. You, O Allah, are our benefactor, not them. Rather, they used to worship the jinn. Most of them were believers in them. So Allah is saying that most of the Qurayshi Arabs or the other Arabs used to worship the jinn. Subhanallah. And they worship angels. And they worship the stars. The Quran says, but they have attributed to Allah partners, the jinn, while He has created them, and have fabricated for Him sons and daughters without knowledge. Exalted is He and high above what they describe. In North Arabia, there were beings referred to as Gineya. That's probably Aramaic. They found an inscription around Palmyra, the Ginaya of the village of Beit Faisal, the good and rewarding gods. So Ginaya are like jinn, and they were worshipping them. Again, see, look, the Arabs of Hijaz were worshipping jinns. They didn't pluck this idea from the south, they plucked this idea from far in the north. The Arabs would invoke security from the jinn. Angels in Surah Zukhruf, and they have made the angels who are servants of the most merciful females. Did they witness their creation? Their testimony will be recorded and they will be questioned. Indeed, those who do not believe in the hereafter name the angels female names, but they have no knowledge thereof. They follow nothing except assumption, and indeed assumption avails nothing against the truth. And mention the day when he will gather them together and say to the angels, was it you that these people used to worship? And they attribute to Allah daughters, exalted is He, and for them is what they desire, i.e. sons. And when one of them is informed of the birth of a female, his face becomes dark and he suppresses grief. They also worship Ashira. Ashira is Sirius. Allah says, and that He it is who is the Lord of Sirius. They used to worship Sirius. Sirius is a star that you can't see in the northern hemisphere. You'll see it as you get close to the equator. If you follow the belt of Orion down like that, the brightest star just below the horizon, or but close to the horizon, is Sirius. This is what they used to worship. Okay, so they used to worship. We know they used to worship. What is pagan worship like? What was the mode of worship? What did they do? We pray 5 times a day. We bow, we prostrate. In Mecca, we go around the Kaaba wearing a specific type of cloth, saying du'as. What did they do? Well, all pagan worship across the world is kind of similar. Whether it's Indian or whether it's North European, African, all pagan worship is similar. So we can look at pagan rituals all across the world and get an understanding of what they did. But still, we want to know details, right? What have we seen already from our slides? We saw some things. We saw libation. We saw the giving of animals. We saw them going around the Kaaba chanting the name of their God, praising the name of their gods. We saw them invoking their gods on journeys for protection or for remembrance or praising their gods. So far we've seen all of this. They worshipped many gods, we know that. Associated with natural elements, we know that. Idolatry, as in it wasn't just, oh, there's a god. No, they would make the idols and worship the idols. Natural phenomena they didn't understand. So pagans all over the world, they worship natural phenomena that they don't understand. They perform ritual sacrifices. All pagans do, the Arabs also did. Ancestor worship. Most pagans venerate their ancestors, and it's interesting if you look at Ibn Kathir's book on the history of the prophets in the time of Nuh alayhi salam, or was it just before, the people, Satan would say to the people, worship, your ancestors are dead or dying. Now that they're dead, why don't you make an idol of them, make a statue of them so you can remember them? Right? They were loved people to you, beloved. Now they're gone. You can remember them. So this is what they did. After a while, he said, bring them into your house. I mean, why outside? They're part of you. You remember them when you're with family, which is what they did. And it eventually led to worship. This is the natural progression. How accurate that story is, I've not seen the evidence, but this is what he's mentioned. So ancestor worship, pagans do. Animism, they worship animals. Seasonal festivals, they do that as well. Divination and omens, they do that. The Yemenites did that. The Arabs did that. The famous oracle at Delphi, the most famous one, should we say? We know of that as well. Abdul Muttalib, when he wanted to draw the lots, right? He drew the lots. It's said that he did it at the feet of Hubal. Now, when we look at the story, I have a problem with that story as well. When we get to the Seerah, we'll analyze that. And Imr al-Qais, when he asked his God, should he seek revenge against the Bani Asad who invaded his the Kindle tribe and killed his father. And he kept getting the answer through divination, no, no, no. Finally, he broke the arrows and threw them at the face. And he said, if this was your family, you would never have stopped me, right? So he's basically, slapped in the face his idol and then went to war. And there's many other instances of this you'll find in the Seerah literature. Priesthood and temples, they have priests and they have temples. Even the pagan Arabs had temples with a chief priest responsible for it. Communion with the divine, they'd commune somehow through those oracular people and through these soothsayers and kahinas and with the divine. And syncretism, borrowing here, there and everywhere. The pagan Arabs believed in Allah, one God, and then they mixed other deities into their worship and gave them different ideas. And they have a healthy pantheon. You're never going to find people that are pagans just worshipping one pagan god. There's always going to be others that they're going to invoke as well. And sometimes they borrow from others. And they have pilgrimage sites that they go to. Sacrifice. As for sacrifice, what did our pagan Arabs do? And that which is sacrificed, slaughtered on an-nasab, stone altars. This is that name that I mentioned, right? The stone altars, nasab, and then there was the masub, the where they would put the idol on top of. So one slaughtering altar is called nasab, and that's called from yasaba, the root word for that one as well. Nasaba, yasaba, it's similar sort. Someone needs to do more research if you're interested in this. Eat not, O believers, of that meat on which Allah's name has not been pronounced at the time of the slaughtering. And they say, these are cattle and crops that are reserved, and none may eat them except whom He wills, claiming whom He will. These are cattle and crops forbidden, and others they claim to be reserved, and cattle upon which the name of Allah is not mentioned. It is a fabrication of falsehood upon Him. He will recompense them for what they have fabricated. Indeed, He is the wise and acquainted. This next is taken directly from Ibn Hisham's Seerah, Ibn Ishaq's Seerah. They had a concept called Bahira, a daughter of a Sabiha, which was a female camel that gave birth to successive females, but no males. It was set free, forbidden to tie her, burden her, share of her wool, or milk her except for guests. This was done to all her female offspring. So they would do this to a Bahira, which was the daughter of a Saiba, and they would just let her go, right? That this sounds similar to Rasul talking about the Amr ibn Amr guy who was the first one to let animals go, right? It's probably in reference to this. They would not touch her, but they would only milk her if guests were coming. So these were probably dedicated to their gods. Then there was Wasila. The Wasila was a female sheep that had 10 successive female offspring in 5 pregnancies. Any new births from this Wasila were assigned only for use or consumption by males. The Hami was a male camel which produced 10 progressive females and was thus similarly forbidden. Allah has not instituted things like Bahira or Saiba or Wasila or Ham, but those who disbelieve invent lies against Allah, and most of them have no understanding. So this is what Allah is saying of them, that what is this that you're doing? I didn't institute this. You've started to do this, and you invent lies against me, and you have no understanding. And then Allah says, and they say, what is in the bellies of such and such cattle, milk or fetus, is for our males alone and forbidden to our females. But if it is born dead, then all have shares therein. Something very strange. All right, okay, so we've understood a bit of their rites. Now let's have a look at their worship styles. What was the worship style of the pre-Arabian Arabs? Well, we know that every house had an idol. The Qurayshis would stroke it upon entering and leaving, thus drawing blessings from it. So it's like you can imagine the Hindus when they come to their god and they do some sort of ritual, bring a bell, serve some food, or whatever they do. I don't know exactly what they do, and then leave. And then when they come back, I don't know. They did the same thing. They would stroke their god. Stroke means venerate their god on going and coming. One Abu Tajrid used to make and sell idols. Obviously, there must have been an idol maker there, right? And when he's making the idols and the people are seeing him and they're thinking, he's cutting, chiseling, and sweating all over the idol. Strange. The Bedouins would buy and take them to their tents. The Bedouins wouldn't be carving in the desert. They'll have to come into city areas for that. Upon embracing Islam, Hind ibn Utbah took one axe and started chopping away at the idol in the house while rebuking. So Hind ibn Utbah bint Utbah is the wife of Abu Sufyan. So there's a hadith here, a tradition here, khabar about her chopping away at an idol. How authentic this is, we don't know, because we do know there was extensive propaganda made by the Umayyads praising all of their lineage and their present members. So whenever we come across a hadith that's something to do with the Umayyads, it's always good to double check sources here. There were also tribal idols with custodians such as Isam al-Kalbi and the custodian of Amra. Waqdidi quotes one person taking his sheep for blessings to an idol. Amr ibn Luhay. Some idols had, he is the guy we mentioned. Some idols had temples or Kaabas attached to them, Kaabas, right? So some idols they were worshipped everywhere, but they had their main seat. Like, where is Baytullah? Allah is worshipped everywhere, but Allah's Bayt is in Mecca. Likewise, Lat was worshipped in Thaqif, in Taif, the place of Banu Thaqif, and the different idols in they had different seats. Those seats were not as elaborate as we saw the massive temples up north, but they were prime. I mean, look at the Kaaba, the Baytullah, the most prominent, famous house in Arabia, and it was a simple affair. In its early rendition, it was man height, no roof, not even completely covered. Right, so and the brickwork, I'm sure the brickwork didn't even look as fancy as smooth as it looks now. Right, so it's a very simple affair. So you can imagine those temples. When these are not grand civilizations like the south in Yemen, we saw that massive temple, and in the north we see those massive temples. No, simple affairs. Picture those. In Al-Uzzā in Nakhla, Manāt in Yathrib, and Dhul Khasla, or is it Dhul Khalasa? Should be Dhul Khalasa if I'm not mistaken. By Ad-Daws, a sanctuary built called Kaaba Yamaniya. Right. So there were a few Kaabas that they had. Their role was somewhat different than the Kaaba in Mecca, but they were called Kaaba as well. Kaaba Yamaniya was the one in the south, and the Syrian Kaaba is known as Baytullah, the house of Allah. Why Syrian Kaaba? Because it's on the road to Syria, but it's very far from Syria. So why was it called the Syrian Kaaba? Idu Falas by Tay had a sanctuary. The Himyari people built sanctuaries. Radu had a sanctuary called Dud Ka'bat. And the Kaaba held 360 idols, and there were other smaller idols and effigies everywhere, and there must have been small, as I mentioned. Different tribes had different idols. They would even do tawaf around these places. The archetype must have been the Kaaba and the holy Islamic rites. So they got these ideas from looking at the Kaaba, the original place of worship, and whatever worship was happening there from pre-Islamic times, Abrahamic times. They went and did the same thing around their own places. The Meccan Kaaba was referred to as the Syrian Kaaba. Maybe because there's a link up north, an old link, because they came from there and everything, and they just named it Syrian Kaaba. Superstition. So they were superstitious. All pagans are superstitious people. Christians and Muslims are not, and Jews are not supposed to be superstitious, but unfortunately we are. What were the superstitions of the pagan Arabs? They used to read cracked bones. So they would have a bone when they needed a reading, just like we have, like you drink coffee and tea and then you turn the cup over and you turn it round and then you take it up and then you read the marks of how the tea is, what's happened, and then you interpret those. Likewise, they would make a fire and get the shoulder bone of a camel. It's very large. The Quran used to be written on it, and they would put it on top of the flame and it would crack. After heating, it would crack, and they would read the cracks. The flying of crows. They would let off birds before a journey or something, and if the birds went this way, that was an omen. If they went that way, that was an omen. Doing Hajj in a strange way, we will look at that when we look at Mecca, inshallah, what they did. They would go to soothsayers. Even the story of Abdul Muttalib, who went up north towards Yathrib to find a soothsayer on a kahina, or somebody of strange knowledge to find out how he redeemed his son who he had pledged to sacrifice to Allah. There was also a kahina in the south as well. They believed poets had jinn or muse with them, just like the old Greeks who would write plays. Anybody intelligent who's able to write literature and plays and think up these amazing things, poets, they thought up amazing poems and the use of language. So they would think that there was a muse, there was a jinni always accompanying them that would whisper into their ears and give them this poetry. Same with the soothsayers, right? Soothsayers were in communion with the jinn and other beings and possibly even their deities. The Meccan referred Prophet as Ibn Abi Kabsha. So the Meccans would refer to Rasul as Ibn Abi Kabsha. This was in reference to the fact that they believed that he was in communion with the jinn or stuff like that. They didn't believe in that it was divine inspiration, or if they did believe, they lied. They believed also that he was in communion with the jinn or something. They would draw lots beside the idols. We mentioned Amrul Qais, even the story of Abdul Muttalib, and just generally, if we take Abdul Muttalib's story out, and they would shoot marked arrows. So imagine having an arrow with like a yes or another arrow with no, and then they would just grab them somehow and shoot them without looking, or they'd hit, I don't know, like some stuff like that. The Hajj, I did say that we would talk about the Hajj in detail when we get to Mecca. We mentioned something now. They would enter, a superstition they had was entering by the back door. The Quran references it. They wouldn't, during the Hajj days, they wouldn't go inside through the front door. They'd break a hole into the back. They'd go in and out there, and they couldn't live under a covered roof. Buying clothing from Quraysh. People who came to Mecca to do the Hajj had to cast off their garments and buy the garments of Quraysh. The Quraysh would give you these garments. If you couldn't afford them, you would bop around the Kaaba, stark as naked, in the nude. And that happened. Many men and women who couldn't afford would go around the Kaaba naked. Their worship has been described in a few places and is just singing and whistling. So where we are solemn going around the Kaaba, and yes, it's one form of worship where you can speak and people do speak. We're in the zone, right? We're kind of reverential. We're not laughing and joking and just totally heedless. And we know what worship is. And part of worship is being in the zone, just being in the zone. Even if you're walking and talking to your friend, you're in the zone. But theirs was whistling and singing and clapping, and stuff like that. And they had pre-Islamic talbiyah. So where we have labbaik Allahumma labbaik, labbaik la sharika lak labbaik innal hamda wan ni'mata lak wal mulk la sharika lak. They would have something and they would add to this. The Quran references their whistling and clapping. In Arafah, they would again remove their clothes. So far from everything that we've seen, what can we gouge? Most Islamic scholars paint a picture of Al-Lāt, Allah, then lesser gods with associated sites. The gods were indigenous. So most scholars of Islam will say there was Allah. And then below Allah were lesser deities, Lāt, Manāt, Uzzā, Hubal, and other deities. And then there was the Kaaba, and then there were other lesser sites. And that the gods were indigenous. The reality is the gods were very ancient and they weren't indigenous. They were from the north, and the earliest Islamic rites imposed upon them, such as Tawaf and the Baytals. So the rites that they did were imposed on them as Islamic rites that they had warped. Why I mentioned Baytal here is there is a black stone in the Kaaba also. It's said to be a meteorite that's descended and placed into the Kaaba. And just because this happens to be a Bayt like an unfashioned rock or a meteorite in other temples, doesn't mean that the Kaaba followed them. As we have to look at it from a theophoric point of view, from a theological point of view, we have to look at it and we have to believe that this was the first archetype and then they did something else. The only other way we can say that they did it is that even in pre-Islamic days with other prophets, they were stones that Allah had caused them to, that was sacred like the black stone. And then they warped the idea and then they started innovating. or we're forced to believe that the black stone was the first stone, and then the idea warped and they worshipped others. Or we can actually even say a third thing. What relation does the Kaaba and the black stone have to do with any Baitul anyway? This is individual, indigenous, and those are something totally different, and we cannot equate the two. These are the ways we look at it. The construction of holy houses and pilgrimage and sacrifice was not just for the Muslims, it was also for the pagans. They would construct holy houses, they would have pilgrimage, and they would have sacrifice. We have sacrifice as well. Allah. Now let's get to the understanding of Allah. Allah is a proper noun for Allah, the one God. So Al-Ilah or Allah, which means the God. So it's like the God would be like, for example, the name of Allah, Allah, the God. It can be like an attribute as well. But actually, Allah, what we think is an attribute, is the proper noun. It's a proper noun of Allah. So Allah's primary name, Allah, translates as the God. And it's a proper noun. It's written Al-Ilah in inscriptions, especially by Christians. In Aramaic, it is Allah. In Syriac, Ilaha. In Hebrew, Allah, Allah. We have graffiti before Moses took them out of bondage, that when they were working as stonemasons and everything, they carved El into the rocks. And the oldest name that we have for God in the Semitic language is El. Now, that El, is it referring to Allah and then it's been corrupted, or was it they just gave it that name? We don't know. Babylon, Bab El, Ba'el, El, and a lot of these names that we saw with El at the end. For example, Mikael, Israel, Israfil, Il is these names are not Arabic. This is the rendition we give to it, Il, but Michael probably would sound about right. Jibrail, Gabra El. It's a Syriac name. It's an Aramaic name, right? El would be God, right? The theophoric name with El as a suffix, as a prefix, as a suffix. So in different Semitic languages in the past, the definite article has been written hal, han, ha, a, and al, right? So you could find, for example, han as a definite article, and I don't know if how el would go with that. Ha, halat, we've seen halat, which is Lat, the deity Lat. We've seen, and hal, and Allah would be from. So the definite article in Arabic, what's unique is al is the definite article. The word Allah is from a root word la yaha, meaning lofty or hidden. Makes sense? Or it's from wilaha, a word means to bewilder, as Allah bewilders when you try to understand Allah because He's beyond comprehension. El, the name I mentioned, the oldest name in the Semitic language we have is El. El, also Il in Ugaritic, and here is the cuneiform Ilu in Phoenician, because I couldn't get it from the copy and paste. God, I've taken it from the dictionary. In Phoenician, that's how it's written. Allah. So in Arabic, it's Allah, right? The double L, in simple Arabic, it was there were different ways of writing the shadda before the shadda or the double L. Allah, that's Allah, and that's how it's written in Phoenician. La pronounced il. So they would say Il for their God. So Michael, Jibrail, Israel. In the Akkadian language, there's the symbol there, it's Ilu. The Hittites, who were a Aryan people living side by side with the Semitic people, El was known as El Kunirsa. And there is in the cuneiform El Kunirsa. And in the northwest Semitic word, it's a northwestern Semitic word. So look again where it's being placed. It's being placed in Syria, meaning God or a proper name. The cognate form of El are found throughout the Semitic languages. They include Ugaritic, Ilu, plural, him. So Elohim. Phoenician, El, plural, Lam. Hebrew, El, plural, Elohim. Aramaic, El, Akkadian, Ilu, plural, Ilanu. It is the suffix in names such as Gabriel, Ishmael, Samuel, Daniel, Michael, Israel. The semantic root lah, Arabic ilah, Aramaic Allah, Elah, Hebrew Eloh. In Ogartic, the plural form meaning gods is Elhim, equivalent to Hebrew Elohim. This is the root of God for Semitic speaking people. An inscription in Qarit al-Faw reads to Kahal and La and Astar. Astar is a South Arabian god. Also Kahal and La is Allah. Beit Kahal, Bi Kahal, so with Kahal wa La wa Tar. The La there is Allah. And in the Namara and Zabib inscriptions, we went through these before in the evolution of the language. These two inscriptions here. Dhikr li lah Sergio bar manfu. Is that mantu or manfu? Walan bar mar lokes. Right? And then they have that sign. Wa Serju bin Daw bin Ser what? So who can spot the name of God? The name of God there is La. We can see it there. May God remember Seerah, son of Amat, Manaf. So okay, it was Manaf, son of Imrul Qais. I thought that was Imrul Qais. Bar Mar Qais. Bar Mar Qais. That's son of Imrul Qais. Seerah, son of Saad, straw and thingy. So the Arabic is written at the bottom, and you can see Al-Ilah on the bottom right hand side. If you look here now, you'll see it. If you look at the bottom right hand side, you'll see Al-Ilah, Al-Ilah. It's written in 3 languages. You can see Greek at the top, you can see another language on the right hand side, and then you can see Arabic at the bottom. Al-Ilah, you can see it. Now you can see it. Al-Ilah, there's a dal at the beginning, so is that, yeah, dhikr. Al-Ilah, Serju, right? So that the jim is there, but there's no dot there. Back then there was no dots as well. Sergio bar, there's no bah, there's no dot under the bar, and then the rest of it, right? Manto, and then it will be. So the Namara inscription. So this is the Namara and Zabad inscriptions. So the Namara inscription is older, which is the top one. Both of them are found in the same area, in the Greater Levant area. It's from 328, and it's in the Nabatean Arabic script. It's angular and non-cursive with minimal connectors between letters. No diacritical marks to differentiate the letters. Clear influence from Aramaic, archaic vocabulary and grammar reflective of early Arabic poetry. 200 years later, in 512, the Zabad inscription, this is now morphing onto the early Arabic script. It's early Arabic script from Nabatean, but more evolved. This time the letters are rounded with cursive, showing the transition from classical towards classical Arabic script. Some letters connectors are visible, yet not fully standardized. Still lacks diacritical marks, fewer Nabatean influences than Namara, more structured and closer to classical Arabic. So you can see the evolution in just these two inscriptions. The top one from 328 is Nabatean Arabic. The bottom one is early Arabic. And it looks like what we know as Arabic now. But the script still hasn't fully evolved. And this is only 50 years before Rasulullah was born. Right? So even after the time of Rasulullah, the script was still evolving a little bit till it became its final form. So that's the Nabatean Arabic above, and if you read the Arabic, في النفس عمر القيس بار عمر مالك العرب كله ذو عصر التاج ومالك السدين وفزاداد وملكهم ومرب. That's the Arabic reading. Here's some further reading if you'd like to read more on what we spoke about today. And this is homework for my students. Thank you very much for today's lesson. An excellent lesson for me, researching it and presenting it. This lesson on pre-Islamic paganism and the development of the Arabic language. Without a doubt, show me that the Arabs came from the north, and it was the most enjoyable lesson for me, this one and the Arabic one, to make our Seerah course. So thank you very much for attending. Inshallah, see you for the next lesson, which will be on pre-Islamic poetry. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على أسعد محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نور الهدى محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.